Hello, how are you?
Hi, Grady. Nice to meet you.
Nice to meet you too.
Wow. Hey, thanks for jumping on this thing.
Oh, you're welcome. Glad to be here.
Look at that cool console you got behind you. What's going on back there?
That's a Soundcraft Sapphire. I think it was made around 1992. I bought it out of climate controlled storage in Houston it was in 2018. So I've had it for about 5 years here in the studio. Uh,
Ooh.
it's taken a lot of work. This is upstairs. The
Yeah.
studio is upstairs. So this is about 450 pounds. And
Whoa.
it had to come up the stairs. I don't know. I can't get it on the video, but there's a railing. One of my videos, there's some shots of this. We had to tear down the railings at the top of the stairs in order to turn the console to get it in the door.
Oh my God.
So it was a pretty major undertaking.
And how do you control the heat up there when you said it was like 106 there last week
Oh,
outside?
I have air conditioning in here. I have I guess like the equivalent of a 2-ton AC unit, but they don't rate them that way anymore. It's a split unit.
Hmm.
But I put a unit up here since it's upstairs, so you've also got heat buildup from the downstairs, which is not climate controlled at all. It's a garage and storage below here.
Oh man.
I had to put in it's twice as big as what it really needs to be for the amount of space, which the studio is about. I think it's about 800 square feet.
Oh, that's pretty cool.
But it's I think the temperature here is supposed to be 109 today. So
Oh
I'm not.
my God.
Yeah, I can be up here, but I don't have any of the equipment on, and I'm not gonna do that during the day for a while because the temperature's just too high. It's
Yeah, yeah.
unfortunate.
Do you have a video of a tour of all 800 square feet of your studio?
Most No, I don't think I have a specific video about that, but you'll see the 2 different parts of the studio are the area where I'm sitting, the control room, and then the
Right.
drum area, and that's really all there is. There's only 2 spaces, and then there's a restroom, but that's not really in any of the videos. It does have a restroom and a dorm refrigerator up here, so it's kind of self-contained,
Oh
even
wow.
though it's right next to my home, so I can go down the stairs over into the house as well. So getting from home to the studio is pretty easy. It's just out the door, up the stairs, and into the studio.
Oh wow. So you have like a separate building for it.
Right. It used to be
That's
a
fun.
garage apartment. We just have a separate garage building, and this used to be a garage apartment. But I recognized when I saw it that the sloped ceiling and everything, and I've got wood, like the shiplap kind of, I don't know what type of wood this is, but it's fairly porous.
Oh wow.
And so it actually is a really decent sounding room, and I didn't really do a whole lot. There is some like RLX type foam behind the drums and over the doors that come into the studio, but I didn't really do a lot of
Wow.
that. I'm used to recording in houses, for years. I don't know, my story, it starts back, in the late 80s in my parents' barn with a 4-track is when I started recording. So,
That's great.
yeah.
Tell me more.
Let's see. So after the 4-track days, I went from the 4-track to a Tascam 488 cassette 8-track, and I was dumb and young and borrowed the money from the bank to buy that, which because I was, I don't know, 18 or 19 years old at the time, and I just had to have more than 4 tracks to record.
Heck yeah.
But I did some recordings with that in a trailer house that I rented, and I actually got some really good recordings with that 488 or a three. What is it? Three is the one that has the mixer built in, a Tascam. I think it's a 488 is what I had,
Okay.
and then from there I ended up at recording school in Arizona and graduated from the Conservatory of Recording Arts and Sciences in 1997.
Nice.
And yeah, and then I've lived in Dallas for several years, and I worked in commercial studios in Dallas.
Oh
And then
wow.
came back to East Texas. I worked at a place in a little bitty town called Groveton, Texas, that's close to where I am now, Lufkin.
Hmm.
And they had a really nice studio out there. And I thought when I actually left Dallas and left my recording career because of my first wife. And
Hmm.
we were having some issues, and so I chose to move back to East Texas, sort of to save my marriage, and because the studio I was working at. was having some issues and I wasn't really able to make a good living. So
Hmm.
I came back to East Texas, and I thought there is no way that I'm gonna get a job doing anything audio related back in little bitty East Texas. And lo and behold, I got a job at Stonewall Studios in Groveton and worked out there. And then amazingly enough, I got a job at a big club called Jitterbugs in Nacogdoches, Texas, and I was the house sound engineer, and I got to work with a lot of country artists at the time. This was around the early 2000s, and I
Wow.
worked with people like Montgomery Gentry came through, Gene Watson, Don Williams was one of the performers that played there. I even
Cool.
I ran monitors and got to meet Hank Williams III at that job.
Nice.
So that was interesting. And that was really fun for me. I'm not a really big country fan. I'm definitely more of like classic rock, alternative rock. And here I am working at this big country bar with all the but it was great. The musicians and all the bands that came through were really easy to work with and they were really pleasant. So that was a really overall that was a good experience. And I actually learned to appreciate country music at that point, which was I'm from
Yeah.
Texas and I didn't listen to country, so that was kind of strange.
Some
So
great
now I do.
musicianship. Yeah.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
So that's how I ended up there. And then I did, the era of recording my bands in like my apartment after I came back to East Texas, and then I stopped working at the studio in Groveton, and I was in a funk band for a while, and we recorded in my apartment in downtown Nacogdoches. And of course, I had to tell all my neighbors in the complex, "Hey, we're going to record an album in my apartment." So we did it during the day, and we got permission from everybody. So that became the era of a portable rig. The band
Yeah.
had a 24 channel Mackie, and we had three Tascam DA88s to record our stuff with. But I think the most we ever got to work was two of the D88s. So everything we did ended up being 16 track because the D88s had issues.
Hmm.
So yeah, I went through that era of moving around and recording in places, wherever I could. Um, so I've had a lot of other studio setups for a while. After that time period, I had this little shack in a little bitty town called Appleby, north of Nacogdoches, and I had a soundtrack pass and I had an MCI JH16 24 track in that little bitty shack.
Wow.
And so I had that until I moved. I got married to my second wife, and we had a house. I put my studio in the back room of our house at that point, which used to be a sunroom. And so that was the having to have an electrician come in and wire that room, and it was a sunroom, and it's like, well, I need to turn these windows and stuff into walls because the acoustics are not going to be very good with all this glass. So that
Oh.
was an interesting time period. And then I moved to a duplex. I was in a duplex for a while, which is where a lot of the current string of albums that I've done over the last 10 years, a lot of that was started in that duplex. And those days, it was a pretty big living room with wood floors, and I had the drum kit in the living room. And of course, it was a rental property, so I couldn't drill any holes in the floor of the wall. So I had the mic snake running down the hall, and the control room was set up in my bedroom. So I'd wake up and roll over, and there was the console and everything against the wall next to the bed. And then from there, I came here to this studio, and that was 6 years. I think I've been here, and the equipment has been upgraded significantly, mainly because I have the space to actually own things like the Sapphire now. So
Yeah. How exciting. And
yeah,
then you've got lots of videos with all different kinds of tape decks and boards and mixers. And do you still have all of those, or do they come and go for the videos?
they come and go for the videos, depending. I mean, some of them I don't necessarily plan on buying something and making a video and then selling it, but I will buy things specifically because I want to make a video about it and, just educate people about especially some of the older equipment. The Tascam M35 is one of the more recent ones that I've done a lot of videos about.
I
And
own
that
that. Yeah.
thing, it sounds surprisingly good. And years ago when I was looking in the 90s, when I was kind of really getting into the gear and stuff, I would have never thought it's something from that era of Tascam. It was minus 10 unbalanced RCA connections, like, blah, we don't want that. But, but that M35 actually sounds really good. It's just one of those things. I cycle through things and it's really just kind of random. I don't have a plan to it. I just pick up things when they're available if I think I can make a cool video. And, eventually I sell some of the stuff if I need to, and sometimes I don't. It just
Yeah.
just kinda depends. They'll stick around for a while and then I'll sell them and get something else in. Usually the reason is because I start running out of space. Then I'll start to sell things so I can actually walk around in my studio again, and it gets where there's no room for the musicians or to actually make music, then it's not much of a studio, so
It's a museum.
right.
I've always liked the idea of the different buildings, though. That's cool that you have like a different structure on your property where your studio is. I remember being invited to go meet Will Ackerman at his place in Vermont, and he had like three or four different buildings on his property that he had built himself out of the trees that were on his property. And one was a home, and one was a house just for his wife to paint, and one was an office, and one was the recording studio. And it was just so interesting. Of course, there's four electric bills and for heating systems and AC systems. It's like it's pretty complex, but um, it seemed interesting because for a while, like in my first house in 2000 till about 2006, I had everything in my living space. So, when you're young, you think, yeah, you just roll out of bed and there's your console and that's cool. Or like McCartney rolling out of bed and there's a piano and he starts writing Yesterday from a Dream. Um, it's very helpful. But then also you start to feel a little crowded sometimes. So it's nice to separate your workspace from your living space.
That
Like
is
some people
true.
can't do that in their head even, they can never stop working because they're a creative person 24/7. Like, do you
I
find you have to turn things on and off just to say, okay, I'm a husband right now?
I do find that I have to do that somewhat. It comes in cycles for me though. There have been times in my life when I absolutely cannot turn off different music that's running through my head. I can't sleep at night because I have just like fully formed pieces of music, and of course I'm not the most skilled musician, and so hearing all this in my head like that's wonderful, and I know
Mm.
it's like I'll never be able to figure out how to actually bring that idea into reality.
Huh.
Um, I mean, I'm a decent musician, but I'm a stronger engineer and an audio person, even though I do play guitar, bass, drums, a little bit of piano and keyboards, but
Nice.
I'm not the greatest musician in the world. I'm more of kind of are you familiar with Steven Wilson
No.
or Porcupine Tree? And he also does a lot of the remixes of classic albums. He's remixed some of my favorite one of my favorite bands is Gentle Giant, and he's done a lot of remixes of some of their classic albums from the '70s. But he said something to that effect: "Is he's more of the big idea guy, and
Right.
then finds like the best musicians to bring in to bring his ideas to life." Of course, I don't have that luxury. I'm usually the only person. I know other musicians, but coordinating schedules is difficult and everything.
You
So I
guys
end up
pretty
just
spread out.
um, mostly, but where I am, there are not a lot of people that do anything other than country and bluegrass music, and that's
Okay.
great. I've worked with some of those people too. I actually love producing that kind of music because it's simple and you can get good sounds fairly easily.
Hmm.
But for my own music and those projects, I only have a few friends that I really work with in this area. The main one is Heath Rogers. He's the creative genius behind Homespun Centaurs, is one of the bands that I've done. I think I don't know how many is three or four albums. Let's see, there are three full length albums and an EP that I've
Nice.
done with Heath, and yeah, I'm basically kind of a honorary member of the band because on the recordings I play the drums and I do the mixing and stuff, but it's all
Oh,
Heath's
cool.
material. He's the songwriter,
Yeah.
and he's one of the people that I've worked with the most. So Homespun Centaurs, Circular Corners is also Heath. That's more of an ambient instrumental kind of band. And then the third one that we did was Shadow plus Echo, which is the same thing. It's just another name for Heath's music. But he tends to have different names because he's so varied in the style of music that he does. So
Oh,
Homespun Centaurs is kind of an Americana, a little more acoustic. but it's still alternative rock kind of music. And then Circular Corners is ambient instrumental, and then Shadow Plus Echo is a little more. Um, I don't really know what you'd call it. It's definitely more loud guitars and stuff than Homespun. And it's the same guy, but he used different names, which I thought was kind of why are you doing that? You're gonna spread things out where people, but it's
Hmm.
because he writes different styles, and putting something like the Shadow Plus Echo songs on a Homespun Centaurs record wouldn't work because they're completely different.
Yeah,
So
maybe. I
that's one of
guess
my
it.
that's the yeah.
Go ahead.
I was just saying the Homespun Centaurs is absolutely one of my favorite bands that I've ever worked with, even though I'm kind of a part of it, but it's mostly I just support Heath and help bring his ideas to life in the studio.
Oh, that's cool.
Yeah.
Well, I guess it just depends on how much he is like the celebrity of them all. Like if somebody just likes what he's doing,
Mhm.
some people might be able to follow him down any genre, and just more of him. We just need more of him.
That's what I enjoy working with him because he's just a great songwriter, and so
Mm,
no matter what style he's presenting me with, for the current project, the material is always gonna be pretty strong. He's just a good writer, so,
that's cool.
yeah.
Yeah. Now, when you say the music in your head you're trying to get out, that's your music you're referring to.
Right.
Yeah.
I've made 3 albums, but the last one was in 2017, and I have another 7 songs that I've recorded since then, and there are
Nice.
bits and pieces of those are in some of the videos, the intro music, but I've never actually finished those. So
Mm,
there's a incomplete album that I started on back in, I think, 2018, the year after my last album came out, and I've just never completed it. And since I never completed it, I took the bits and pieces and mixed just instrumental versions of them. And I've used those in a lot of YouTube videos for intros, and just may have used part of them for some of the mixing videos too, just because whatever material I have that I can present in the video. It has to be something I have permission to use. So I use some of this unreleased material for different things.
yeah,
What I
sure.
really lacked was lyrics. I've never been able to write lyrics because the newer stuff, it's almost a southern rock style album, which is
Oh,
kind of similar to the very first ones that I did, but really, really different from the last album I actually released under my own name.
and the
That
other
was
albums?
almost, I have three that I've put out. The first one in 2010 is called Subliminal Moonshine, and the second one from 2011 is called Moon Dust. And the third one from 2017 is 13 channels.
Nice.
And they're all very, the first two are more similar to each other. 13 channels is a completely different kind of record. I was actually listening to, have you heard of a band called Carnival from Australia?
No.
They're a progressive rock band. The closest thing that you might be familiar with is the band Tool. Which
Okay.
is not that's not my favorite band. I used to like Tool, I've seen them in concert, but I would not really listen to Tool, but Carnival is similar to that, and so that album is very modern progressive rock compared to the first 2, which are much more classic rock, and they even have some kind of alt country or Americana influence on my first 2 albums, and then I completely went left field and made this kind of, like, atmospheric progressive rock album that's I think it's great, but no one else liked it. The first 2 everyone liked. When I put out 13 channels, even my friends and stuff, they didn't get it. So,
Oh,
I
you're
don't know. I
surprised.
I get it. So
Well, there's a lot more people on the planet, you know? We can't really
right.
say nobody liked it because not everybody's even heard it. So,
That's true, and that's the thing is most of the work I do in here and the people that I talk about on the YouTube channel that I've worked with, they're not anyone that anyone knows about. Everything that I've been involved with in the audio industry is mostly just small independent artists, and they're not widely known. So, but that's okay. Keeps the pressure off of me, and we're actually getting something. It's not really done for commercial reasons, not myself and most of the people I work with. I mean, we'd like for the music to be heard, but it's more about we're actually trying to make art. I guess that's silly, but music is to me, music is art, and we're trying to do something that is at least somewhat interesting or innovative, and trying to do something different. And um, when I made my last album, 13 Channels, I didn't really care. I made it for me, and it actually
Exactly.
was yeah.
I
So
think that's what's important for artists to do. I think most of the great artists are unknown. You know, getting known or having that kind of uh, exposure, whether you call it uh, wanted or unwanted or good or bad, to say to be known or unknown is better, whatever. It's
right,
it's like that's a whole game unto itself. It's got nothing to do with being an artist or being a musician. So if you're not working at that, I don't think there's something wrong with that. I don't think everything has to be monetized. So yeah,
right,
I'm right there with you. It's like anything that you want to do. Like if somebody was making pottery or somebody was painting, the first thing wouldn't always be, so when are you going to make a ton of those so you can sell them? It doesn't even enter the equation sometimes. But these days, everything wants to be monetized, or, you're a failure if it's not making you a bundle or whatever. And I don't think any of that has anything to do with it. In fact,
no,
some of the things that are making the most money don't even sound that musical, so I mean, the whole
definitely
thing is
true.
is made up and it's a joke, it's like just do what you love and make what you want to make and enjoy what you want to enjoy. There are no rules. I think that's what we all get hung up on. It's like, oh, but it's not this. And I'm so bored of reading reviews of music that say, well, it's not this and it's not this. And this new Eric Clapton album is not this and it's not that. And it's certainly not like his album that he did, blah, blah, blah. It's like, can't you just review what is rather than compare it to everything he's ever done? Nobody's asking you for a retrospective of his career. It's like, it's just so
Right,
funny the way people jump in on things. And it's always with this negative spin or, gotcha. Going to show you how this person's a failure, or going to show you how this person crashed and burned because that's what humans do, or that's how artists are so stupid. And you're like, oh my God, why is it always the lowest of the low and the cheapest shot? It's like a bad comedian always doing bad language or poo poo jokes or whatever. It's like, don't you have any kind of intelligence where you can here's a comparison. Why don't you be a little bit more like Jerry Seinfeld? Something that's actually funny and intelligent, Like,
absolutely.
so then it starts sounding like, okay, now I'm getting judgmental, but there are flavors, I think, is what you're talking about. And there's levels of engagement, you know? So, like when I was searching around on YouTube saying, okay, well, how are people doing hybrid studios these days? And how are people playing with mixers, if anybody is? That's how I found your channel. So that's what got me excited. It was like, I got to write to Grady because he's doing these fun things. And I'm finding for me, like recently, I watched that fish documentary, and it was
Mhm.
so cool to watch them talking about the studio over at this part of Vermont, and then his friend's studio over there, and they start a project here, and they go and finish it over there, and there was just so much camaraderie and so much interaction and company and creativity together, and I just thought, I got to start reaching out to people because, like you say, most of the creative people I know are spread out around the world. I
Mhm.
wish I lived next door to all of the people I've been speaking to so that I could have more interaction and more creative volleys with. But I think because we can share files and because of Zoom and things like this, we can visit. We can, meet and stuff.
Indeed.
And I think that's fantastic. So as always, it's like, let's just try to embrace whatever technology is available and get as close to the thing, this effervescent, I can't even put my finger on what I'm looking for thing. I should at least try a few things, at least reach out and just say hello and see if anything is receptive somewhere. And I'm
Right.
finding that as I talk to each person, we're all looking for the same thing. We're all looking for some kind of connection and wish we could do this every week or wish this was happening once a month somewhere where we could all physically actually be in the same space. Like people are trying to start all kinds of uh, artistic hangs and things. It's
I
cool.
think that's great. We do need to collaborate more like that, especially, the audio engineering community, people that are into this kind of thing, especially the people that still want to use an analog console.
Mm.
And believe it or not, I didn't even know that they called that hybrid mixing when I started the YouTube channel. I just knew because I started with analog gear. And then
Yeah, me too.
what happened is about 2007, my youngest son was going to be born. He was born in 2007, and when he was born, I had a little one. And at the time, I was running a soundtracks console, and I had the MCI JH1624 track in my home
Mm.
studio. It was a glorified home studio, obviously, with the big
Mm.
MCI machine. So I had that set up, and the reason I switched to digital was because of having a young child in the house. And I figured I need something that if I want to record a song, I can go in, flip the power on, and I'm ready to go. Instead of like with the MCI, I have to go in, potentially calibrate the entire machine to make sure the transport's adjusted because those old MCI machines are a little bit
Mm.
persnickety. I'll say it was persnickety, and I just didn't feel like I had the time to go in, do alignments and calibrations with the tape machine. So I was still using analog tape until 2008. And I only
Wow.
quit because of the birth of a young child. And I thought, well, I won't have time to make any music in my studio if I keep the analog machine.
Isn't that
But
interesting?
it really is. So I bought a pair of audio interfaces, and I just naturally hooked the audio interfaces up the same way I would have a tape machine, and I just went from there. I didn't even
Yeah.
know they called it hybrid mixing. I came from the old school where I used tape machines. In college, it was Otari MTR 90s. And
Nice.
then and then I worked in studios in Dallas that had a combination of an MCI machines and then ADATs and Tascam DA88s, but all of that was still using a console
Yes.
because they were, the modular digital multi-tracks and not a digital audio workstation. And so that's when I sold the MCI is when I bought audio interfaces. And at first I was using
Nice.
Sonar 7 or Sonar 8, I think. I think I had Sonar 7 and then I went to Sonar 8 or 8.5.
Wow.
So that was my beginnings of hybrid for me, but I didn't even know that it was hybrid at the time. I just thought, oh, well, these audio interfaces are my tape machine now. And I have
Hmm.
a computer that connects to them. And I thought about getting a hard disk recorder, but I thought, well, I'm also a computer person. I'm an IT systems engineer. I've done that for 25 years.
Wow.
So that was kind of weird because, I do that for a living in my day job, and yet I didn't jump on board with the digital audio workstation until, 2008.
Hmm.
I had seen it in college. We used Pro Tools. It was Pro Tools 3, at the time, really, really
Wow.
old version of Pro Tools. So
That's so
so it was
cool.
just a weird thing, and then I figured out when I started doing YouTube, that's when I figured out, "Oh, they called this hybrid mixing." I said, "Hey, I know how to do that." And I said, "I bet I could make some videos that might help some people that wanna," they may have an old console laying around and help them out. And
That's
so I
amazing
made
that it,
some videos, and those were the most popular ones I've made, and I kind of scratched my head and I said, "I guess more people like this than I thought." So,
but it's amazing how organically you fell into all that. I mean,
yeah,
because it's just really, well, this is my background and this is how we did it. This isn't anything super cool. It's like, ooh, hybrid, like it's a new thing or whatever. It's like, no, it's just merging what was to what is. And
right,
I always thought the most fun part was the console. So when I switched to Logic in 2005, I was kind of disappointed and depressed that the most fun part was gone. I was glad there was no more tape hiss because I was on a half-inch 8-track, and then I had those ADAT machines, which were really a drag, having four of those trying to lock up all the time, and which one
right,
would spin out or spin off, and you'd have to open it up and repair it, and all these nonsense, and the offsetting every time you wanted to add a section to a tune or cut a section out. It was a lot of I can't even remember how we did that stuff, but it was like all those things I would do to lengthen a song or shorten a song. And I didn't realize that I could have plugged my big Studio Master Track Mix 32 into the interfaces and still
right.
gotten into my computer, which I kept using Logic as a tape machine. I barely knew what else Logic did. I was just considering it like the recorder, like you say. And then I got so used to not using a console, but still missing it. So that when I got the console, I was like, what do you do with this thing now? Like it's not attached to anything. Now you got to buy
Right.
all this other outboard stuff just to use half the auxes and to have all the buttons do something, you know? And I was watching videos where a guy was showing you how you could use the aux sends to actually affect effects in Logic from your analog console. And I was like, oh, mamma mia. Like there was a lot to learn with the ins and outs of how things talk to each other and how you can actually affect the right thing you're trying the right parameter, you know. I even
Right.
tried the Tascam 1884 trying to have just a controller thinking I could mix with that, but that was a drag and it was an interface built in. It didn't really work really well as a mixer. And I still have the Behringer X Touch for just a quick balance a bunch of faders if you want to, you know, just quickly just get a balance together. But there's like a lot of features on that and on the Audient behind me that it's like, how else can I hook this up and use this? So that's exactly why I look up people like you to say, what are you doing? You know, like what other fun can we have in here? You know?
It's something I answer a lot of comments on my videos, and that's something that I've, tried to help people with.
Hmm.
Um, you need to kind of understand analog signal flow in order to understand how to use it with a digital system. But
Okay.
the good thing is if you understand how the analog studio works and you understand how your digital audio workstation software and your interface works,
Hmm.
then there are so many different tricks you can do. I probably even haven't thought of everything I could do with so many different analog inputs and outputs on both analog gear and digital gear. If you know what you're doing, you can route anything to anywhere and do all kinds of crazy stuff.
Yeah. I
I,
have.
I tend to
Go
I
ahead.
tend to stick with more of the old analog tricks, but
Hmm.
that's all I was gonna say.
Oh. Well, yeah, I did rig up a bunch of patch bays and I have tons of options now. And it took forever to hook up a bunch of different things and to get things to really work because, as you know, like those virtual tracks that come back out of your DAW, where are they going to actually be? And digital to analog and analog to digital and all this converting and whatever's. And now I'm at that point where it's like, okay, starting a new album, how do you want to work? You know, before it was really easy as a songwriter, like you say, just jump right in, plug things in, just go. But
Right.
now, some days you feel like being the engineer. Some days you got nothing. You know, what am I going to play to actually record? I want to record something. Like it depends on which part of the project you're on. And then once I'm in a project, it's like all systems go. Like you can't get your head out of it, and you're just busy, busy, busy getting to the finish line, you know. But starting another one, it's like now there's too many options. I don't even know which end is up some days.
Right.
I
Well,
just crack myself up.
I started mixing things back on the analog console after I got this Sapphire
Oh,
because
wow.
I I compared it. There's probably some videos. I don't remember. I've made so many videos on my
You
channel. I
have.
don't remember right off the top of my head. I'd have to go back and look, but I'm pretty sure there's some videos comparing the sound of the console with summing in the box.
Yes,
And
you
I
did.
started using this, and the console, it just has so much headroom,
Hmm.
and it just has a really wide sound to it that you can't really get in the computer,
Are you
and
doing any effects in the box or any
sometimes
detailed EQ in the box and then just more broader EQ on the mixer?
sometimes I do. It depends. Mostly if I need something really surgical EQ wise, I'll use a plugin.
Right.
But for shaping the sound and actually building the mix, I'm using console EQ for almost everything. So there may be in a typical mix, there may be 3 or 4 tracks in the whole mix that have any kind of a plug-in on them. One of the most common things I'll do is I'll use a tape plug-in on certain things
Hmm.
before it hits the console, because obviously once it comes out of the audio interface output, it is already affected by the plugin before it hits the analog system. So
Right.
you have to be mindful of that. Of course, some of the hybrid mixers, you can actually put the plugin in line and do
Mm-hmm.
different things. But since this is a regular old school analog console, whatever I do in the box is already affected before it hits the analog system. So there's a balancing act there sometimes, but I generally will try to do as much as I can with the console and with analog outboard gear. And I'll
Hmm.
only use things in the plugin. Usually plugins are for problem solving and if I have to correct something.
And is that
So
for tracking or just for mixing or both?
that's usually for mixing. Tracking, I don't really track with a lot of compression or anything. Occasionally
Hmm.
I will. I had a band that had a bass player at one time and he was really clanky. He had a very aggressive playing style. And
Hmm.
so he had a lot of transients in his playing, and so I had to track him through a Uri compressor just to be able to actually record the track without just having spikes and craziness all over the
Just to be able
place.
to
So,
use the part. Yeah.
right. Especially if I'm tracking on tape, then,
Hmm.
sometimes if I'm tracking the tape, I'll add a little high end to cymbals, overheads, hi-hat, just to counteract the DBX noise reduction on the Tascam. But I don't generally find I have to do at nearly as much compression if I'm tracking to tape because the analog tape saturation. And to me, I don't know, do you have DBX on your MS-16? Do you
I
use
don't.
DBX? You don't? Okay. I
No.
was just curious because I have it on my MSR-16, and to me, it sounds like I have a little bit of DBX compression on everything.
Oh,
I don't know
wow.
if that's something anyone else has ever noticed. I've never seen anyone mention that, but it almost
Hmm.
sounds like I'm running everything through just a little bit of DVX compression. And I know that's how the noise reduction works. It compresses the audio and then expands it on playback.
Hmm.
I'm thinking it actually kind of has the sound of a DBX compressor, just a little bit, just that kind of nice. I don't know what the sound a DBX compressor gets, but there's a particular signature that they have. And
That
I
is
really
something you
like
like.
that. I
Yeah.
love it on snare drum, especially a
Oh,
DBX
cool.
compressor or a Symmetrix 501. All I have is cheap analog gear,
I
but I
remember that
find that
now. I used to rent that one, the Symmetric 501. It worked very easily and nicely.
they're a very good compressor. I have one, and mine's a newer model, and it was made in 1999. And of course, everybody on the forums back then, when I actually used to frequent the forums before it became more YouTube and Facebook groups like it is now, but people would say the ones on the Symmetrix 501, the ones with the metal switches, are way better than the newer ones.
Okay.
And I have one with the plastic switches. This thing sounds great. I think I've had my 501 for 20 years or something, and
Right.
it gets used all the time. I don't see that the metal switch version would sound any better or any different. I don't know. There's a lot of hype about things, and
It depends on what
I
they updated.
right.
But what do you
So
mix to once it's
I
coming
mix
off
back to digital.
back into the box?
Back into the box, the master out of the console. If I have anything on the overall mix, it'll be on the console inserts. Most of the
Okay.
time, I don't mix with any master bus compression. Occasionally, I will. Usually, that's going to be the RNC. I'll use an RNC with an EQ in the side chain, so I can
Okay.
kind of sculpt the RNC on the bus always in super nice mode. Just barely compressing a little bit and then tweaking the side chain with the graphic EQ, just and or nothing on the bus, and then the output of the console goes back into a pair of inputs on the interface, and that's
The,
the final mix print.
the RNC is a compressor?
Yes, the really nice compressor. Hold on, I actually had it close by. Some of the
Oh,
stuff I can't show you, but the RNC, I can unhook it right here.
the really nice compressor.
This little guy.
Oh, how cute.
These are fantastic. These are made by FMR Audio in Texas. I think they're in Austin, Texas. Of course, this
Oh,
one has a Mercenary. If anybody remembers Mercenary Audio, it's where I got this from Mercenary. So I've had this for a long time too.
I remember that
These are
name.
great little compressors. This is a digitally controlled analog compressor.
Oh, cool.
So very, can be extremely transparent, which is why it works so great on the master bus. It has the little super nice mode button. It's not plugged in, so I can't make it turn on. But that super nice mode switch, that on a mix on the mix bus, and then
What's
I'll
it doing
dive.
unplugged?
Yeah, that's a great little compressor, and
It
I
looks
think
like a
I bought that one.
snack. It looks like you
Yeah,
like a sandwich. You could just
it's a little small thing, but I mean, it's a great compressor. It's actually one of my favorites, and it's, the only thing I don't like the RNC on is it cannot handle bass guitar for some reason. You cannot put a bass through it. It just can't handle it. It
Wow.
overloads it, and it does very well. It's my, if I'm tracking vocals, that's another thing. I do track vocals with compression a lot of the time, and
Mm-hmm.
if I'm tracking a vocal with compression, it's gonna be this with the super nice mode on.
Hmm.
It's just really smooth. Of course, I could use, an optical compressor or something, but this, just a little bit of this to keep the levels under control is really all I need. I really prefer, even back when I was using analog tape, I prefer to do most of the changing to the sound in the mix.
Hmm.
That's the way we were taught in college was, you don't want to take too much away. If you take something away when you're recording it, then you can't get it back.
Exactly.
And so that's always been my philosophy is record as close to full fidelity to tape or your recording medium as you can, and then you can always change that in the mix. But if you take
Mm.
something out, then you can't get it back.
Right.
So that was the way I was trained in college is, don't EQ and compress the tape unless you have to. Is I was very much taught by like the old school method because I learned from these people in the 90s,
Yeah.
So
Well, yeah, those days it was beautiful because it was about capturing a live group of players and don't mess it up, you know?
right.
And it was a broader, bigger net, I think, like you say, to catch all the music and not interfere with it too much. And I think everybody's getting very nitpicky these days, putting like 15 plugins on every track and it's you dive deep into every plugin and you come out a different rabbit hole 3 days later. It's
You
like,
end up wasting a lot of time that way is what
yeah,
I
yeah,
did, is I
yeah.
wasted a lot of time, and it was, that is
Not making
definitely
very much
something
music.
that's something that I noticed too, and another thing I noticed is when, because I went to in 2008, I sold the MCI, I still had a console, but I would track through the console, and then I would mix in the box for a long
Hmm.
time.
Yeah.
And when I switched back to doing hybrid, what we call it now, hybrid mixing, I realized that on a vocal track in the box, I might have 5 plugins, or on a bass guitar, I might have a compressor to get the tone right, then I might have a multi-band compressor to keep the low notes from overwhelming the mix when, depending on
Right.
how the player was playing, and I end up with all these amounts of plugins on these tracks.
Mhm.
And I switched over to using the analog console, and all of a sudden, hey, I don't need all those plugins. It sounds pretty close already. I just need to do a little bit of EQ, maybe patch in one compressor instead of three in a series. And so
Wow.
that's what got me thinking is like maybe these plugins are not really processing the audio the way that we think they are.
I know.
'Cause why on earth does my Yuri LA10 compressor, I can use that on almost any bass part and it just does a job. That it just does what I want to do. Where with the plugins, to get that same effect on the same bass track, it might take me 4 plugins adjusted differently, and I can throw that bass through the LA10 and it's just done. It's already there.
Yeah.
So I don't I mean, that could be my own fault. That may be a that may be a me thing. Maybe I don't know how to use the plugins correctly, but I just found I was able to get away with doing a lot less once I started
Mhm.
mixing through the console. I did not have to work nearly as hard. The mix would come together a lot quicker, and so instead of 5 hours or 6 to mix a single song, I might have a decent mix in a couple of hours. And
Wow.
that was kind of mind blowing at the times. Like, I have all this technology and
Yeah.
it seems like I'm doing these great things with this computer software, and then I listen to the final mix, and it's like it's not there.
Hmm.
So
So
I don't really know.
did you have these different consoles as the center between your speakers from the beginning, or like when you were mixing in the box, you'd like go to another section of your studio and just mix in the box?
I did a little of both of those things. Most of the time, it has been set up like this. Even when I was mixing in the box, I still had the console set up kind of like it is now behind me, and I
Yeah.
would just have a keyboard and mouse in front of the console and sit at the console. But then at times, I have had another setup in another room At one time, I had a mixing station in my kitchen, which had a little built-in desk at the end of the kitchen, and so I had the big studio as the bedroom and the living room, and then I had a little mix studio with a pair of little small Fostex monitors sitting there, and I could sit in there in the kitchen and mix.
Mm.
So I've done a little bit of both, but most of the time, anything I've done over the last 6 or 7 years, it's been in front of either this console or the one that was in here before, which was soundtracks that I had before the Sapphire.
Yeah. Yeah.
So,
And what's hooked up to the Sapphire now? Do you like all the different
um,
aux sends? Do you have different reverbs or effects or extra external EQs or?
I don't have any external EQs right now. Well, I actually do have one, but I only use it on a side chain for compression. The way the console is set up is this side is the digital system, 1 through 24. This is all the audio interface. And then the other side of it over here, which is 25 through 40, I guess, is the 16 track, the MSR 16. So they're both connected because this console is an inline console. So I have 44 channels, and every channel has a tape output and a tape return.
Mm.
So I just split it out like that, where my analog is on this side of the console and digital is over here. And
That's
I
fun.
have the patch bay. I can patch between the two over here, so I can and so it works pretty well. It's a really complicated setup, and I don't think anybody could really use this studio without me here. And there are patch bay maps and everything else, but I change things in here constantly because of YouTube. I'm always having to change things because I get a new console or something. It's like, okay, now I need to run a mic snakes to this little console so I can run my mic panel where my drum mics connect into a different console. And so there's just it gets reworked all the time in here, mainly because of the videos. So
Wow. Wow.
yeah, my videos take a really long time to make. You've watched them, they're analog gear.
Mm-hmm.
The typical video on my channel is between 6 and 8 hours to film, and maybe even a little more when you include all the editing time. The videos are just really, because I'm using analog gear, it means that the way that I have to film and edit the videos is more complicated than if I was just doing a screen capture like a lot of YouTubers do. This
Right.
stuff
And you've
is
got a
all
few
analog.
cameras. Yeah.
Two cameras mainly. I have a Canon DSLR that I use, and it's an older one. It's a Rebel T something. I don't remember, T3i or something like that.
I have
And
the
then I use
T3i. Is that what we're looking at right now? The T3i?
no, this is a Google Pixel phone, and this is
Oh.
actually my second camera. I use the Google Pixel 5 as my second camera. So if there's a two camera shot where I'm playing a drum kit or something,
Hmm.
usually the Canon will be the forward facing shot, and then the overhead shot will be the phone because it's light enough to put up in the air on the tripod over the kit.
Right.
I usually am only filming with two cameras because really that's all I have.
Mm-hmm.
So, and there's only me. My videos are generally, unless you see someone else in the video, I'm the one starting the buttons and running across the room to the drum set, or
I
running
know.
over to the hall.
I
And
do
it
that
just,
too.
yeah, it takes a long time. I don't know
Wouldn't it
if
be
anybody that
nice? They're talking about all this AI stuff, but wouldn't it be cool if we could just clone ourselves?
I
If
know.
I had five of me, that would really be helpful.
It would be great. And then, if my family would come over, which I'm not gonna say that my family doesn't help because they have helped push buttons, especially when
Ah,
I've done videos with the Tascam MSR 16. And
yeah,
I'm running 2 cameras, I'm running a tape machine, I'm running 2 cameras, and I'm running the digital system to capture the audio as I'm
yeah.
recording tape, and then I have to have somebody come help push buttons because I'll be, running around the room like a crazy person to do it.
So then what are
So
you capturing all your camera or your two cameras on and your audio on? What software do you use to make your videos?
almost everything I use now, the video editing is different, but the audio stuff in my studio is all based on Reaper. I use Reaper, Reaper Digital Audio Workstation for almost everything digital that's done in the studio is done with Reaper.
Okay.
And
And the
then
sound of the videos, you mean?
the sound
That's
of the
pretty cool.
videos is all edited together in Reaper, and then I'll output the file from Reaper and then sync that to the video.
Wow.
So even my voice tracks are recorded separately from the video. The cameras are shot separately, and then I have usually my voice mic. It's an Audio Technica AT 2020, and
Mm-hmm.
that's what's on my voice in nearly every video because it's a quiet mic.
Yeah.
I can actually get the gain high enough. I can put the microphone like 2, 3 feet away from me, and I can get good, good quality for dialogue that way.
They
And
make
I
great
do
mics.
compress that. That goes through the RNC on the way. It goes from the microphone. Usually, I'm just using one of the interface preamps, nothing exotic, and then it goes through the RNC in super nice mode when I'm recording. That way, I don't have to go back and compress the voice again in
Mm,
Reaper before it syncs. It's been a learning process. I've had to figure out how to film videos with analog gear. I
mm-hmm.
figured from the beginning, it's like, okay, I can't use the camera audio because the quality is just not good enough. And so I realized then I have to use one of my studio microphones and I'm going to have to record the audio separately and sync it, or the
Right.
quality's not going to be good enough. And
Yeah,
so it's been a learning process for me,
I know.
not only knowing audio engineering, but then applying that to making YouTube videos is like a totally different world.
Right.
And then the
And
video editing, I do all that in DaVinci Resolve.
oh
So
yeah, me too. Are you using the demo version or the real thing?
it's just a demo version for right
Me
now.
too.
It's
Me too.
18, I think, Resolve 18,
Right.
and that runs on it used to run on a PC, but I have recently the studio has now been converted to a Mac. So
Oh
I'm
wow.
using a Mac now. And I love Macs. I've had a MacBook Pro, which actually the MacBook Pro is what records the voice tracks for the videos because a lot of times I'll be playing back things on the big system back here
Yeah.
and I need a separate system because if I'm playing and stopping things in the video, I have to capture the audio that's coming out of the console somewhere else. So I have two
Exactly.
separate digital audio rigs in here, one based on the MacBook Pro over here and one with a Mac Pro that runs
Wow.
behind me.
And is that
So
two screens behind you or one long screen?
it's two. I'm just sitting in front of this two screens. They're just smart TVs, 32-inch smart TVs, and they're mounted on wall mounts that swing out over the console. I can move them if I want to. And the way I run it is the tracks will be on the left screen for me,
Mm,
left, and then the mixer on the right.
nice.
Yeah, yeah. You don't see that in the videos too much because I don't do a lot of screen capture. But when you do see a screen capture, I'm usually capturing just the mixer screen on the right. I'm not capturing both screens. So
Right. And you're using ScreenFlow for that?
I use what is it called? It's a On the Mac. I just use QuickTime because it
Okay.
has built-in screen capture. So on the Macs, it's QuickTime,
Hmm.
OBS Studio. That's what I used to use when I was still running Windows on the big DAW rig. That was OBS Studio, which actually is really good.
That's super
It,
cool.
yeah,
There's so many ways to do all of this. It's amazing.
yes, and
No,
it's a lot of work to figure it out.
it is. It is. And thankfully there are videos on all of this to help us all. But
Right.
you had mentioned on even one of my videos that there was something in my hybrid video talking that had helped you. Do you remember what that was?
Not off the
I
top of my
can't
head.
imagine.
I remember that occurrence, but I don't remember.
I
I
can't imagine what
remember
I would have been
saying
able to.
that, but I don't remember what it was now.
Yeah.
I picked up a lot of things from your videos, especially when you talked about the MS-16, the Tascam that you have.
Oh
You've
yeah.
gone over some of that in some videos, which was interesting to me because I've always liked those machines.
I know. I had the chance to buy a 24 track Sony, a 2-inch machine a couple of months ago, and I passed it up because I didn't want a big washing machine down here. I'm like, where am I going to put the beast? But I have a
Right.
picture of it, a picture of the very one that I passed up on a big canvas uh, photo print, which is fun to look at because growing up in the 70s, that's what studios looked like, consoles and tape decks, and it still looks cool to me. It's
Right.
inspiring to just glance up at it once in a while. But I love the
Cool.
quiet, and I love that I don't have to wait for it to rewind, and I love so many things about digital. So it's not a bad thing to be in sort of this hybrid world. The only reason I got the MS-16 was that I missed my 8 track half-inch machine. It looks very similar to it. It's easy to keep in a rack and it doesn't take up as much space as the 24 track. And it was like a throwback, just like an old friend to have back in there. And I have recorded directly to it and overdubbed and used all 16 tracks. And I have just recorded through the mixer, through the tape deck, right to Logic, just to warm the tracks and tapeify them, I guess. Um, Still not sure how the best way is I want to work because the Audient 4816 has the ability of keeping the tape deck hooked up as well as Logic. And so I can use them independently. I can go back and forth, either or together. And because it's an inline console, it's like I could have something returning in one place and going out another.
Right,
And it's wild because the ins and outs on this thing are just like endless. It's I have to make little notes for myself, pages of notebooks of like, where did I hook this up and how did I get that working the other day? I was in a flow. And I can see why people just want to mix or just want to produce or just want to track because then you can keep your studio in one kind of configuration and just boom, 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 do your thing. But because I'm writing and producing and arranging and playing all the instruments, it's like I always want the mics ready to go on every instrument. And I want things like hooked up instantly. And it's like, well, now you have to patch it because not everything could be normal. So how do you want to work? And
right.
it's an interesting conundrum because I feel like I haven't sorted out my favorite way to work yet. That's why I like to talk to folks like you.
My favorite way to work is probably hybrid and just using the digital audio workstation and interfaces like it's a tape machine.
Yeah,
And of course, I can do things in there too, so I love having the ability to use a plug-in.
I
But
know.
I prefer even when I'm tracking to luckily my interfaces do a cool thing. They act like a tape machine. They pass the input signal straight to the output. It's kind of like when your tape machine is in input mode, input monitor mode. And that's what these audio interfaces, they're older ones. They're Echo Audio Fire 12s,
Ah,
but they have really good conversion. And they have this thing where they have the little mixer panel and you can unmute so that the input of that channel passes straight through to the output like a tape machine.
like a
So it
director.
allows, right, it's kind of like that. It just goes through the input to the output. So the monitor fader on the console is actually the output of the tape machine, and the small fader is sending to the tape machine.
That's what
So,
this would do. Yeah,
right, I'm listening to the return of the tape machine, even when it's not in record. If it's in, the interfaces act like they're in input monitor mode, so I
right.
can set levels when I'm not even recording on Reaper or anything. So
Nice.
that's the way that I generally work. Let's see. Oh, getting notifications on my phone. So that's generally the way I work is I just treat the computer and the interface like it's a tape machine. It's a tape machine that can do a lot more than an old tape machine can, but
Mm-hmm.
that's how it gets treated in my studio. Even when I'm tracking, that's how I work is I'll have everything going to the separate channels. And instead of building a monitor mix in the DAW, I build my monitor mix on the faders because my interfaces are sending all those input signals back out through the console. So
Right.
I'll just build my monitor mix and then I can build my headphone mix for the musicians from a combination of the monitor mix and the aux sends, just like you would in the analog days.
Yeah.
So basically, my whole philosophy is using the computer as if it's a very, very advanced tape machine with a lot more features than the actual analog machines had.
So those interfaces don't have to be reconverted back to analog because they just had that feature built in.
Right. They just pass the input signal through the output. That's why I've kept them, even though technically they're kind of out of date because they're FireWire.
Well, that's
But with
probably
the
why they made them that way because they were coming from where we were
right,
both coming from in analog days prior.
Well, they
That's
don't make them anymore, but Echo did put out new Mac drivers for the FireWire. So I'm running a Mac Pro with Monterey, and the
mm,
drivers for the Echo Audio Fires still work with that, which is fantastic. I don't think they will if I update Mac OS, but this is fine. It's modern enough for me for now. I'm
mm-hmm.
not one of those guys that upgrades my digital stuff all the time.
No.
That's what I do in my daily life is IT work.
Mm-hmm.
And if you upgrade something, sometimes it causes problems. So
Yeah.
because of that background, I'm much more likely to take it slow if I make any changes.
Yeah.
In
You're like
fact, yeah,
warning.
I keep the same version of Reaper. Reaper puts out new versions all the time, and
Mm.
my workstation, I keep this. I was still running a Reaper 5 until I switched to the Mac 3 or 4 months ago. I was still running, mini versions behind on Reaper because hey, it was working right.
Yeah.
I want to change
Most
it or upgrade it.
No, most
So
of the new versions of Logic that I've heard about have everything to do with beats and, you know, people creating drum grooves and things like that. And I'm recording real drums, so I haven't upgraded Logic either. I kept doing all the updates to a 2018, no, a 2014 Mac a bunch of years ago, and updating all the plugins all the time. And then it got to the point where my Mac was working at 300 CPU, and Apple was laughing at me saying, "You can't run this. You need to buy a new computer." So I thought,
uh,
okay, so now the trick is don't do the updates, keep your computer working. But then you have to take the computer offline because now the protocols are bad for the operating system. You can't use it as an internet connection. It's not trustworthy and it won't work. And all the plugins often have built-in things that say, here's an update, here's an update. Why don't you do this? This is unplugged. You should update this. So I stay offline, you know, and
that's what I did. That's what I do too. My main digital audio workstation rig back here, it's not
mm,
connected to the internet.
yeah,
So that means I still have to use, well, I don't have it here, but it means I still have to use iLock because I
right,
don't have an internet connection on my main rig. Now I can put it online if I want to. I actually have a separate router and switch that it goes through, and I have the setting on that router to tell it not to let this Mac have internet access, but it can still talk to the other computers on the network. So I can move files around internally, but it doesn't have internet
oh,
access.
that's smart. Yeah,
So it's a lot of my day job.
it's really helped you.
My day job, knowing IT has really helped, even though it's not my preference in the studio. I prefer to work with organic instruments like you do,
Yeah.
drums, bass, guitar. I mean, we do use some software instruments and things just because, hey, we can't afford a Mellotron.
Oh yeah,
And
I
we
use all
really
those
like,
cool sounds too.
yeah, we love that stuff because the things we can't have.
Exactly,
But
a whole orchestra.
generally,
I've got everything.
but
English
if it's something
horns.
we can have, if something I actually have in here in the
Yeah,
studio, like the drum kit, I'm not going to use a plug-in or a sample for that because I have it.
right.
So
And I have
yeah,
some cool synths over there and organs and things like that. Real piano. So
you'll
yeah,
never
that's
guess
cool.
what I actually do for a living now.
What you do
What
for a
I
living?
actually, yeah, what I've done for the last 25 years, besides I have had my studio, but I was an IT person. But what I do now is I actually teach computers to kindergarten through fifth grade at a private school.
Oh, you were saying you just started teaching. Yeah.
Yeah, that's my day job now. I take care of the technology at the school and I teach the kids.
Oh,
So
that's sweet.
yeah, that's a new thing for me.
That's
That
exciting.
and then the YouTube channel. YouTube channel is another big thing, and
That's
still
so
work
cool.
on music when I can. So
Now, but you say you have just regular smart TVs behind you. I have an old TV upstairs and I brought it down here and hooked it up once, but the resolution wasn't that good. How do you get around that?
these are both 1080. They're high def TVs.
Oh,
This one's
okay.
a Toshiba. That one, what is that? Vizio. They're not expensive TVs. I think they were actually open box. Is how I got these both at Best Buy as an
Nice.
open special. And I just run HDMI cables from the Mac Pro, which it has an HDMI out, but they say not to use the one that's actually built into it because it won't something about the frame rate's not as good. And so
Right.
I have two Thunderbolt to HDMI adapters from the Mac Pro that run these two screens. And so
Yeah.
it's just turning the TV on and changing the input to the HDMI input on both of them, which is
Right.
really annoying the Toshiba smart TV, I have to change the input every time I turn this thing on. It comes up with the smart screen and Netflix and all that, and I have to go through the menu and find the HDMI input. The cheaper TV, the Vizio over here, it doesn't do that. I turn it on and it's on the HDMI input ready to go, and I don't understand why this one won't stay put. So the screens, having smart TVs, I'd probably rather have actual monitors instead
Hmm.
because I like all the smart functions. But then again, I also use this TV to watch YouTube and I have it hooked up to the studio monitor so I can watch YouTube with really good sound quality here.
Oh,
So
that's cool.
yeah,
Yeah, everything has a plus and a minus, it seems.
right,
Depending
exactly.
upon what you're looking at, you're like either inspired and everything is going well, or you're running into all the negatives thinking that everything has got a limitation. And it's like, but everything has a limitation. So
True.
uh, it's
That's
pretty
my
funny.
that's my life is called workarounds.
Yeah,
You know,
there
finding a
is.
workaround for things that don't work the way you expect them to. Well, this doesn't do what I really want it to do, but maybe there's a way I can work around that problem. You
Yeah, how
know,
else can I get there?
and that happens with analog gear. I mean,
Oh, yeah.
here's a funny story. I used to work at a studio in Dallas. It's long gone now. It was called Fat Track Studios,
I
and
remember
he had
those
an
days.
MCI 500 series console, an MCI JH16, some ADATs, and I was trying to do a mix off of 16 track analog tape, the MCI, and had channels on the console that just were not happy. And so I'm there in
Oh,
the middle of the session, powering down the MCI console and moving modules from the higher channels down so I could get 16 in a row that worked because the console had a lot of issues. So that
wow.
was something I experienced back in the 90s. And it's like, yeah, you're taking apart a console and moving the modules of an MCI from the like channel 20 over to 16 so that you had
Mm,
16 in a row so you could actually mix down your 16 track session and get your final mix.
wow.
So I've had experience with that too. That probably helps with some of the frustrating aspects of working hybrid and all the analog gear I have in here. That experience with, hey, it could be a lot worse. You
That's a
know?
cool workaround.
Yeah.
Have you actually taken apart some of the gear, the older gear, and resoldered things or moved buttons if they weren't staying engaged and used a spring from another button? And
I've done a little bit of that, but most of the soldering I've done in this studio is just connecting all of the analog gear. I was lucky when I got this Sapphire, it came with a lot of the cables, the snake cables. They use the big EDAC or Elco connectors, and then they
yeah,
break out. Well, the ends of I got all the cabling with the console, which was great because that would have been really expensive if I
yeah,
hadn't,
right.
but all the connectors on the snakes that I got were either wrong for my gear or they had been cut off.
Oh
And
my
so
God.
when I got this console, I came at that point I worked until full time 5 days a week until 5:30. I'd come home at 5:30 and spend probably until 9 or 9:30 soldering. And I did that for probably 3 months to get this
Wow.
console installed.
Oh my
Yeah,
God.
a lot of work, but it's actually been worth it. Now, since I got
Mhm.
this, I have the built-in patch bay and then I have some auxiliary patch bays. And when I got this, it took the studio to a whole nother level because then I had a piece of equipment that I could actually connect a lot of the other things that I already had to.
Yeah.
And the convenience of the patch bay, being able to actually use analog equipment like I remembered when I used to work in commercial studios because
Hmm.
my own studio had just been, I didn't have a lot. I might have had one patch bay, but it was mostly climb behind the console, plug things in, come back out. Oh, that's not right. Climb behind the console again.
Yeah.
And so when I got this and I really said, okay, I'm going to set this up the way that I've really always wanted my studio to be. And it's taken several years and it's still anybody that has an analog studio, it's constantly changing. Anytime you
Yeah.
get a new piece of equipment, you're changing things
Yep.
constantly in flux. That's just how it is.
I know the
So,
Studio Master had all the ins and outs right at the back of the console on the top so that you could
right.
change your mind and move things. And I used to do the send receive cables and just put the stereo input in the top of the console, and the ins and outs would go into the patch bay to all kinds of outboard gear. and I could just send and return it right to the same channel and use the balance on those outboard pieces to determine how much of that effect or EQ thing, whatever it was I was patching to, was needed. But now this one's everything's in the back, and a lot of things are in the patch bay. But I think what is a little confusing to me sometimes is that my Apollo interfaces from Universal Audio have the built-in virtual console. So
Right.
if I want to use those mic inputs, I used to have external preamps hooked up to those. And now it's like maybe you want to put them all online so that you don't have to keep putting it on the mic or line. Sometimes everything's working in the analog world, but it's not giving me a signal into Logic. And then I have to remember to change what's happening in the virtual console. And it's like a
Exactly.
console with a console with a console. It's like various extra preamps plus the preamps in that console, plus the preamps in the virtual console. It's like redundant after redundant after redundant.
Even this setup's like that. I have the preamps in the console, the outboard preamps. There's so many different, and then luckily my interfaces, they're fairly simple, which is why I've kept them. So I have that
Mhm.
routing to consider because I can change my audio interfaces to send a channel to a different channel than what it came in on if I want to. But
Yeah.
I try to keep that simple because, like what you were saying, I think of that same way. I have at least three layers like that. You
Hmm.
had five in what you were describing, but I have three this way. And my setup, I've kept it simple on purpose.
Mm.
Um, I don't want to take too long to set up or to do anything. It's gonna,
Exactly.
hamper the creativity. But at the same time, my studio, because of my just penchant for using so much analog gear, it makes it more difficult. Everything's a little bit more complicated. And definitely, you'll find like, hey, why is it? I've had a problem with my kick drum mic not working recently. It's like I can't figure out where that is.
Hmm.
And you're going to different points in the signal channel. Is it the mic? And so I take the mic and plug a little pigtail into the patch bay. And it's like, no, the mic's working. Was it the mic panel? It's like, well, I can get the signal to the top row of the patch bay.
Right.
What's going on here? And in
Exactly.
some cases, for a while, I put this console in. I had a couple of channels swapped somehow, and so that got really confusing. Like, where's my signal? And it was like one I'd plugged two of them in backwards somewhere,
Yep.
and oh
I've
man,
done
it
all of
says,
that.
yeah, all analog studios. That's one of the things. If you have an analog studio, you better stay organized, and you have to patch bay maps, write things down because you will forget.
Yes,
And I
I
still
know.
do that. I still forget. I'll repatch something behind one of my racks temporarily for a video,
Yep.
and then I'll forget that I've done that.
Yeah,
And I
that'd be
did write
normal.
it on the patch bay, and then the next time, like, well, this isn't working right. So then I have to climb back behind the racks and
Hmm.
get back there, and it's kind of dark when I've got the flashlight, and I'm like, what's
Yep.
going on?
I got the extra light back there, the light on my head apparatus, a little flashlight in my hand, got the little glasses on. I'm trying to read these little writings and like 2 feet of cables. Like when you're first starting to patch things in, you're going, okay, I'll remember that this was plugged to here and this was there. That's very logical. And then, like, 6 months later, it's like piles and piles of cables because I didn't do the floating floor. And you're like, wow, now I don't want it to go there. How am I going to find that cable? And you're underneath there trying to pull out ends of cables and find what goes where. And in the process, you've unplugged 6 other things
That
accidentally.
happens
Oh,
to me all the time. It
it's
happens to
just
me
like
all the time.
how, like you want to be an engineer, you're going to spend a lot of time on your hands and knees
Right. That's the thing
underneath
that
here.
I'm getting where I don't like that. My knees don't like that anymore. And
uh,
and then my
that's
console is so crazy. I don't have very much space behind this.
right.
And I mean, there's enough room. I made sure to leave enough room where I can get behind it. But
Yes.
the way my room is, I don't know if you can see, but there is no way to get behind this console. The only way to get behind my console is to climb underneath it
And come
and
up.
then sit up behind it. And then everything's in front of you. But then to get back out, you've got to lay back down and scoot yourself out from under the console. And I thought, well, that wasn't the best plan. Maybe I should have left like 4 feet behind this thing instead of just a foot and a half. And I left the space. And the racks are the same way. They're about 2 feet off the wall because I know I'm gonna have to get behind them all the time.
But if
And
you
there's
did the
cables.
Yeah, but if you did the right acoustic thing and had it 3/4 back in the room where they say things should be, then you'd have cables all over the place that you'd
And
be
in my
tripping over.
studio, I wouldn't have any room to put anything else. There would
Yeah,
be no
yeah,
room. My control room area would be way too small then. I would lose so many feet, and, I mean, this
yep.
control room area is probably, I think this across here is about 12 feet, and then from here to the next section to the next room is maybe 15. It's not huge.
Wow.
But I'm lucky I have these vaulted ceilings in here. That's really
Mm,
nice. And actually, I get great drum sounds. And the other room, the drum room, is pretty much like this, even though it's separate. It's like it's that way in the studio behind the camera. But
mm,
so, and it has the same kind of ceiling setup. And that was what was impressive. This is just a garage apartment. I thought, well, I don't know
right.
if it's going to sound good, but I was hopeful because of the sloped ceilings. And the only issue I really have is that sometimes I like to have my overheads a little bit higher, and that
Ah,
doesn't work. But other than that, I get a great sound without a lot of work.
that's
I don't
great.
know. I'm not one of those guys that goes around working on the acoustic stuff. To me, it's like some of the best records that I've ever heard in my life were recorded in less than perfect spaces.
Oh, everything
You
goes. And
know,
even if they say it was made and spent millions of dollars, the people who work there will tell you how imperfect it is. There is
right,
no such thing.
right,
So, yeah, we're all okay. And I always come back to the fact that it's a gigantic playing field and anything and everything goes, you know? And
right.
so the only thing that we have to deal with is the mind games around the folks who say you don't belong, you know, because there are professional engineers that I know who are like, well, that's not real engineering. And why didn't you do a subfloor? And you should have done such and such. And you don't need all that. And it's because they're not writers, they're not players, they're just mixers. And it's
Right.
like, why are you mastering by yourself? And it's like, I've used professional mastering engineers. I love them, but they're expensive. And I put out way too much music. And I like mastering as well, just as an art form. So it's like, depending upon who you're talking to, you feel validated or invalidated. And you have to keep that totally inside yourself
I
because it
agree with
doesn't matter
that.
what anybody else thinks.
Right, and I think that's a real problem in the audio industry is
It's
we
very
have this
snooty. Yeah, it's very
there it's
classical.
it's an elitist kind of attitude is
It really is.
you're not good enough, like my Soundcraft Sapphire, that's not good enough. This console is not good enough. This is not an API and it's not a Neve, so obviously it's not a professional console, right?
So obviously, we don't know what we're doing.
Yeah, I don't know what I'm doing. I have a Soundcraft. It's not a Neve. I don't, well, obviously I don't have $200,000 to spend. This was a $40,000 console when it was new, and to me, it's perfectly adequate.
Hmm.
Um, do you want to make music, or do you want to have bragging rights? Which is really the most important? Are you trying to brag about your studio and just collect cool stuff and say, look how cool I am because I have a Neve, I have an API, and I have a Studer tape machine. I'm
A
so
Cadillac and a
cool.
Ferrari.
Like, do you want to do that, or do you want to make music? And
Yeah.
I find that I have a lot of less expensive equipment in my studio because mainly I can't afford the really expensive stuff, but I get great sounds out of a lot of this, and I get my sound out of
It's
it.
knowing what you're doing.
Right.
I've had a
And
lot of guitar students with $7,000 guitars and they sound horrible because they still don't know how to play and they don't realize it's their touch that gives them their sound. So we know the gear or even the most expensive plugin isn't going to make the day.
that is true. And it's not. It's what you do with it.
Yeah.
And of course, certain types of gear I do like to use. I like the sound of certain things. But, usually if it's an expensive preamp or something like that, well, I probably have a clone of it. I don't have the real
Right.
thing 'cause it's too
Right.
expensive. But,
People
instead
don't
of an
know.
API preamp, I have two Cappy VP26s. Instead
Those
of
are
a
great though.
Neve,
Yeah.
I have one of the Golden Age Neve clones. Great
Nice.
preamp. And I just don't see the need. I think there is a big problem with this elitist attitude, and I think a lot of the audio gear that people are made to covet
Yes.
because of advertisement and people, it's too expensive.
Yeah.
In fact, that's something that I haven't put in one of my YouTube videos, but I'm gonna say put this out there now while we're talking, is I actually, I took a break from YouTube the beginning of this year. I took about 4 or 5 months off and didn't make any videos, and that was
Hmm.
partially for some personal reasons. I had some things going on that I just didn't have the time to do videos that were up to my standards, but there was another reason. I started to worry at some point that my videos were gonna make people that are, people out there that are watching my channel, it's going to make them think they need to go buy an analog console or they need to have
Oh.
this, that, or the other. And I started to feel guilty. It's like, I don't want to influence people that may not be able to really afford that because they think they need it, because you really don't. You can
Hmm.
make it with a laptop and a microphone, but then on the other flip side of that, as I know there are people that are interested in this older gear, and I
Yeah.
know sometimes consoles like the one I have, sometimes people end up with those things for nothing or next to nothing because someone couldn't store it.
I know.
And in that case, I felt like, well, my videos are helping people. But what I don't want to do with my YouTube channel is have anybody thinking that they need this or that to be able to make a good recording.
I never
That's
got that
that's
impression from your videos.
I hope not. That's just a concern I had, is I don't want to be,
Yeah.
I don't want to be influencing people to, say in my mind, I'm like, what if I influence somebody out there that goes and buys a console and then he doesn't have money to take care of himself or his family or something because he spent the money on.
Well,
I mean,
that's
that's
well, it
probably
wouldn't be
just,
your fault.
no, it's not my fault, but it's one of those things. I'm against kind of the elitist attitude, and I'm thinking, well, I usually mostly low end stuff, unless it's
Yeah.
something I really feel like I need. I just don't want to be an influence in that kind of an elitist way. I don't want to make anyone feel like what their equipment is that's not good enough.
Yeah.
And so when people comment, I have this old console, whatever, I usually will try to be positive about it because
Hmm.
honestly, anything, if it works and you can record music with it, it's just a tool.
Yeah.
And it
Well, when I was looking for a console again, I was disappointed that Studio Master wasn't making analog consoles anymore
I know,
because I regretted getting rid of the big one, but it was 5 feet long and it had 32 channels and the mic pre's actually sounded good, you know? So if I had realized I didn't need all those uh, analog to digital converters that they were talking about to come back and mix on it, I could have just tracked through it at least.
right.
And so when I started looking at older analog consoles, even on eBay and Reverb, you could get all kinds of things very inexpensively, but it was where are you going to put them? And then some of them, it was like, really, are you ever going to use 60 channels at once? Like, how many people are you going to get down here? That's insane. And if you did mix that way, that'd be a lot of conversion back. And then somebody would point out to me, yes, but you're only 4'11" and you'll never reach the top of that console because you're not 6 feet. You have to be able to bend and reach the top of the console. I was like, I never thought of that because you don't see any of this gear in person. Most record stores and gear stores, they don't have any of this high end or older gear in there. So like you got to go to a Vintage King Audio and I'm not close enough. I'm not in Nashville. I'm not in LA. And I just thought, what are you going to get? What are you going to get? And then some of them have the giant separate power supplies, so they were going to heat up or be noisy. And with the Studio Master, I had put it through another room and put the cable through the wall so that I didn't have to hear the hum, in my recordings. So I was looking for something that wouldn't heat up, wouldn't use a ton of electricity, and wouldn't need a lot of maintenance. And that's when this used Audient became apparent because it wasn't as heavy. It didn't have an external power supply and used it was you know a lot more reasonable to get, but everybody had said to me then, oh, so now are you going to get a separate desk? Are you going to change the desk out instead of having just the racks and the computer here? Are you going to put the console in the center of it? And when I see different setups, like even a mastering setup, sometimes I want just a mastering looking setup, sometimes I want the console in the center, sometimes I want what I've got, and it's like, well, then you might as well keep everything as is. because I've got the console over there in the center of two other speakers. There's a second speaker there, and I do have the Logic sort of set up here. And in terms of thinking, even just quickly making a mix on the Audient, like having everything come back, it's not like the old days. I've gotten so used to working in the box and on this little Behringer thing that it's like I don't know which way I want to do it now. And it's like, well, how did you used to do that in the old days? Oh, that was cumbersome. Oh, you only worked on one song at a time. Like it's just so funny. Do you find yourself thinking of things like that?
I do, definitely. That's something that I think about a lot when I'm mixing.
It's a
And
little like,
what I it's very confusing, but what I'll tend to do is certain projects, if they are not really into it or it's just a demo, then I'll mix it in the box.
mm,
And then I'll use the console on the stuff that, like the things that I'm actually more involved with the projects.
mm,
It just depends, and especially if I have just a guitarist and a vocalist and they just sing and play guitar, I'm not gonna probably put that out to the console and mix it. It's just 2 tracks. I'll just do that in the box.
makes sense.
Yeah, right, so but most of the time, if it's music that I care about and it's one of my personal projects or homespun sitar, some of the people that I work with will mostly mix with the console.
Mm-hmm.
And my workflow, even when I'm mixing in the box, everything's right here. You can't see it on the camera. I'm on a tripod here, but over here, of course, it's a Mac, but that's not a Mac mouse. But over here, the keyboard and mouse is right here. And
Okay.
so I just sit at the console and I'll have the screens above the console. And so even if I'm mixing in the box, the speakers, everything's the same.
Oh,
So
that's interesting. Yeah.
yeah, so I'll just mix at the console, even if it's an in the box mix, I'm still sitting at the console. And, the only thing I might touch is the control room volume knob while I'm mixing.
Yeah.
And
And
I'll
then
just have that running through a couple of channels on the console. So
how big are some of your projects? How many tracks are you actually mixing?
usually it's between 18 and 24 that
Yeah.
I'm putting out through the console. I don't do a lot of projects with huge amounts of tracks.
Mm-hmm.
Um, most of the music that I work on is more organic type music anyway.
Yeah.
Occasionally, I'll have something that's more because I only have 24 outputs on my audio interfaces. So if
Mm,
I have more than will fit, what I'll do when I'm mixing through the console, I'll combine my 3 tom mics to a stereo stem.
right.
It's just in Reaper. I'm just sending those 3 tracks out of a pair of outputs.
Exactly.
I don't even create a bus or anything. I just send the 3 tracks from the DAW, and I just send them to, like, channel 3 and 4, and then
Yes.
that comes up on the console so I can do my panning in the box, and then I save the track on the console that way.
Nice.
So I'll do that to get things down where I have it, um, paired out to
Homogenized.
right. But I try to leave as many of them separate. I'll only really combine things in the box
Yeah.
if I just don't have enough outputs on the interface, so I don't have enough channels. Other
I
than that,
remember.
I want everything on a separate channel.
I know. And I remember being baffled that you could use one channel for stereo in
Right,
Logic. I was like,
right.
what? So now, having to use two channels on analog, I'm spoiled. I want the one channel. I want to be able to use as many of these for as many tracks as possible. And I have to use two for stereo. I was like, oh.
There were some programs I used, maybe it was Sonar or earlier versions of Reaper, but I used to get in trouble with that sometimes because, I don't want my stuff if it got recorded, and that's what it is. If you record it in Reaper as a stereo track, then there's no way to split it.
Ooh,
And then I want that stereo track to go out to the console, and so, okay, well, I have to assign that stereo track to a pair of outputs and send it through 2 channels in the console. So
mm-hmm.
that gets a little bit weird when I have to deal with that kinda stuff.
Yeah,
It's just a little bit it just requires thinking about each individual thing and how you wanna do it, and it's always based on how many outputs do I have from the computer and how
right.
many channels do I have it hooked up on the console. So I just everything is different. I'll just approach everything and do it as close to my normal standard workflow as I can, but to
Yeah.
fit, I'll tweak a few things just to make it work.
And every song is different. Like I keep thinking, start them the same way, make a template, or try to figure out how it's going to spill out to the console in a similar way. But not every song fits that. Like you have to kind of do it after the fact. And all that parsing of how you're going to do it is like not mixing. It's prep, and I have to remember to separate those things on different days perhaps because I'm eager to mix and it's like it's not here. It's not going to just flow out here except for those Aphex converters that I have because now I can go uh it gets 16 out automatically without having to do anything. Um Especially if I have them set up in a template like 8 at 1, 8 at 2, 8 at all the way through to 16. It's going out the 8 at cables. So and then the other thing that was confusing recently was like if I got that Behringer P16 so that everybody could have their own personal monitor to make their own mix for their headphones, how is that going to go out Ethernet cable as well as ADAT cables if the Aphex machines are out using the ADAT cables? Like, how many things can go out? It depends on how many connections. And then one of my Thunderbolt cables died. You can't even get an old Thunderbolt 1 cable on Amazon anymore. I had to go to eBay because
Right.
there's a Thunderbolt 2 and a Thunderbolt 3. And I'm like, wow, they're making my stuff obsolete, even though I'm trying to stay like I never need anything else because there's going to be a cable that breaks that you'll never be able to replace.
And that's one of the reasons why I tend to spend more money on analog gear than digital because it won't,
Me too.
it's not gonna, I'm not gonna be forced to lose what I already paid for because of the software or an operating system upgrade. Then the
Or
plugin that
because,
I bought is useless.
yeah, they won't make a driver for the new Mac or whatever. Yeah. Yeah.
Right. And so I stick with, analog gear is a better investment because it's at least worth something. It's a physical thing I can hold. And if I need the money, I can go and sell my Yuri LA10 on Reverb,
Hmm.
which I never do because that's probably not one of my favorite compressors that I have, but I could. It's actually worth something. Whereas reselling a plugin license, if they even allow you to do it,
No,
it's just
it's
a
not going
lot
to
of
be
the
worth
digital
much.
stuff, it's just a waste of money and time sometimes. So that's why I stick with things like I stick with Reaper because it's not
Right.
expensive and it's really stable too. Of
Yeah.
course, coming from the Windows world because I used Windows in my studio and I love Macs. I'm not an anti-Mac person, but the reason I used Windows for my digital audio workstation so long was purely because of the cost
Yes.
because buying a
Most
good
people, I
enough
think.
Macintosh, and I'm an IT guy, so my PCs
Huh.
they may be like an older HP or something, but I've probably taken it out and modified it. They may have a different processor than it came with. It's
Whoa.
I did that for years, and finally now I'm on a Mac Pro, as I just got really fed up with it, and I got to where hey, I don't have the time to customize my own PCs. And then I
Yeah.
was having problems testing out the new Windows 11, which is better looking, but it's not better for audio for sure. Nothing works on that. And so I just said, and plus that's my day job. It's mostly, and well, I teach now, but for 25 years, my day job has been fixing IT stuff, mostly Windows for
Yes. You're like
businesses.
done with that.
So, oh, Windows is terrible. It's just Microsoft. I don't know what happened to those guys. They they lost the plot somewhere. They don't know what they're doing now. Apple too, in some ways, I'm not, I'm not as down on Apple as I am on Microsoft because Apple products generally is at least they work right.
Mm.
So, but yeah, Windows is, and that's too bad because even until a year or two ago, I was pretty happy running Windows for my main digital audio workstation. But I did realize even then it worked for me, but that's because I know how to work with it and I've worked on it for a living. And so I
Right.
know how to solve those problems. But for the average person, if you're not a computer tech, use a Mac. Don't
Yeah.
bother with Windows because you're going to end up having to turn off a bunch of background services. There's all this tuning you have to do just to get the operating system where it doesn't have processes that get in the way of the audio.
Oh, wow.
It can work, but
Hmm.
you really have to tweak Windows to make it a really solid operating system for digital audio. And I got this Mac and hooked it up to my old interfaces. They had luckily Echo had made a new driver, and I got this set up running with this Mac. And a couple of hours when I put the Mac Pro in. It was like, wow. And I knew that. I've used Macs for years and I knew it was going to be better, but just taking that
That's
step
great.
and so
But seeing
finally
it
the studio's Mac. So
and seeing it and feeling it work in your own system, in your own setup, it's like that's a whole different thing. You go, oh, this is solving a lot of problems. I'm so glad I did this.
right. And it
Yeah,
really did. The Mac, using Macs is just a lot more trouble free. It costs more, but what I did is I bought a refurbished Mac Pro.
right.
And it's not the latest OS, it runs Monterey, but that's new enough to support all my software and it's old enough that it works with my audio interfaces. So
That's
that's
great.
gonna be where I am for for this foreseeable future. I'll be on a Mac running Monterey. I still run Reaper as my main digital audio workstation. But like you, I've used Logic before. I think the last time I used it was 9. It was before the newest Logic 10 came out. But
Yeah.
I like Logic as well. I particularly like the what do they call the time stretch thing? There's a name,
Oh, flex time.
Flex Time. Yeah, I liked that
Yeah.
a lot. It
Yeah.
actually saved a drum track that I did way back, I don't know, probably like 10 years ago.
That's
At a
cool.
drum track, and that saved it.
That's
But I
nice.
try not to edit a lot of things. That's something I'd like to know from you, or what's your philosophy? Do you edit drum tracks and edit the stuff that you record, or do you try to stay away from that as much as possible?
Here and there I do. I've messed up a lot of things time-wise with stuff if I've moved things and not moved other things or whatever. But I really like Chris Vandeviver's channel on YouTube, Why Logic Pro Rules. And he has some fantastic videos on anything to do with time stretching or drum programming or beat mapping or like anything you have to do. There was a video he had once where he even purposely put in a tambourine track completely out of time and then played it back and it was perfect eighth notes in the tempo he wanted. And I don't always record everything to a grid, so I don't want everything to be that perfect, but it is
Right.
nice then to be able to tell Logic, follow this guitar and make the drums follow that because I'll put the guitar part down first, then I'll play my drums. And sometimes it's just play to a click and then play to my drums or whatever, but I often put down a guitar thing first. And you can get everybody to play together by stripping all the tracks of whatever time stamp it had and then telling it to follow something else. And that's pretty cool because then it's got a
Hmm.
natural feel and it's not just on a rigid click with just a little bit of a swing or humanizing factor put in. It's literally your humanizing factor. It's your performance. And I guess a lot of the DAWs do that, but I like that feature a lot.
That sounds like a really excellent feature. I need to check out his channel. That
Oh,
sounds
his
like it'd be
channel
very
is superb,
useful.
and we did a chat recently that's already out and published. So yeah, he's a
I need to
genius when it
catch up
comes to
on that
logic.
too. I've been busy lately and I need to catch up on my YouTube viewing and making
Yeah.
videos too. So
Well, I was going to ask you what kind of things have you been finding inspiring? Like I just found a new channel by John Meyer, Jonmeyer, and he's a really good composer and film scorer and has a nice studio setup and is making cool videos. But he's also sounds really personable and human. And he's been looking for artistic company too, so he agreed to jump onto one of these. We'll record that in a couple of days. But I think there's a lot of us, especially since the pandemic, that we're all home. We were totally psyched to be forced to stay home, and now we're getting a little stir crazy. And I've been out in the world, but um, I'm always looking for more artistic company. So that leads me to my question that I've been asking everybody: is like, how do you stay inspired? Like how do you find new things to feed you or to feel like doing any of this? I mean, sometimes you can feel like you're at a dead end and you've got everything you've ever wanted, but now you got to jump in somewhere and you finish a project, you're exhausted, but you want to do something. And it's like, what is the next thing? For me, it's always new songs, new recordings, but
uh-oh.
I like, whoa.
Oh, hold on, I'm trying to find my app. My phone is dinging at me. There we go.
Oh,
Got it.
there it is.
Sorry, I tapped the thing.
That's okay.
let's see. What I find inspiring is not usually the production side of it. Now, sometimes if I get a new piece of gear, I do find really good sounds to be inspiring. I like things to
True.
sound good,
Me too,
but
yeah.
I think mostly, I don't know, it's kind of a catch-22 because I would say that I am inspired when I hear other artists' music, but then there's also the danger of I don't want to be copying anyone. I don't want my music to sound like that. But lately, that's actually what's been inspiring me. I've been less inspired by gear or plugins, and I've been more
Mhm.
inspired by listening to other artists' music, which is not normally something that I do. That's just something that
Yeah.
it kind of comes and goes. But lately, it's been finding inspiration from music that I enjoy, whether that's, a lot of the older classic rock that I listen to. um, I thought it was kind of inspiring the new "Let It Be" that Dolly Parton put out with Ringo and Paul McCartney. Um, my wife was really into that. She's a big Dolly Parton fan, and I
That's
thought that
great.
was really cool. Actually, she played that for me because I think that came out just Friday, and she put it on the TV in the house, and I thought, well, that's interesting.
Yeah, and with
And
Peter Frampton and Ringo and
yeah,
Paul,
the
can't go
guitar
wrong.
solo, it was pretty good. So I did find that inspiring. I
Did you
find it
see the
inspiring. Go ahead.
or did you see the Beatles Get Back, that whole special? That was
Oh
pretty
yeah,
inspiring.
absolutely. That was a few years ago, but that was very inspiring as
Yeah,
well.
yeah.
I do find it inspiring to read about something that I do, and you probably do this too. But if I find like a classic album that I've never heard before, because
Mm.
there's tons of music that was made years and years ago that
Oh,
didn't
yeah,
get popular enough, and people like me never heard of it.
me too.
So finding something like that that I really enjoy and then going down the rabbit hole trying to figure out where this was recorded, who
Mm,
recorded it,
mhm.
what kind of tape machine and console, how did they make this sound so good?
I do the same thing.
And one of those is, I'm sure you're familiar with Big Star, right?
Oh,
Big
right.
Star. Yeah, that's one that's many years ago when I started listening to a lot of Big Star, I found not only the music to be very inspiring, but the production of,
Mm.
particularly the first number 1 record. That was released in '72, and at the time, I compared that to some other things that came out in '72, and, of course, we're talking about Ardent Studios in Memphis,
Mm.
and there's just nothing those albums, the Big Star albums, they sound fantastic, and so
Yeah.
that was a rabbit hole. It's like, what kinda were they using a 3 MM56 tape machine? I know it was a Auditronics console with Spectrasonics components that they built it out of. In fact,
Wow.
I've seen that console at the Stax Museum. It used to be on my screens in the background, a lot of my videos see the picture on my desktop background of that console at the Stax Museum.
Wow.
And there was something about not and it's not just the equipment they use, it's the way that they would record things then.
Sure.
Not as many mics on the drums, things were just done differently. But those are great sounding
They didn't have enough
records.
tracks, yeah.
Those things, I guess you could say that's what inspires me when I hear something, and particularly if it was made a long time ago and it just
Mm.
has a sound quality that I really like to it. It's like these guys did something special when they were recording this, and all they had
Mm.
was analog gear and
Yeah.
tape. And then another thing, I don't know if you're familiar, I mentioned them before, but one of my favorite bands in the world is Gentle Giant.
Right.
They only existed from 1970 to 1980, and it's very unusual progressive rock. The earlier stuff is a little more like the 60s, maybe a little bit like some of the psychedelic rock, but it's much more classical and jazz influence in their music,
Mm.
and the records just sound amazing.
That's awesome.
And yeah, I just that band absolutely floors me, and it's not for everyone. It's one of those things. When I first started listening to them, which I came late to the game, I had no idea who they were until a few years ago,
Mm.
and I started listening to it because of a video I saw on YouTube. Some prog rock professor guy or something talked about it, and so I
Cool.
said, okay, I'll go download. And I started listening to a couple of them, and at first I was like scratching my head, and I thought, well, like this is awful, but it's not. I said, "There's something to this." And it's like I didn't like it at first. I really didn't. I was like, "I don't like this band that much. I don't know what this guy was talking about." But it
Wow.
was thing I just kept listening.
Mm,
And then I've listened to some of the other albums, and now I'm just floored by it. And but the sound quality is also part of the reason is that they
sure.
recorded that at Advision Studio, which is where a lot of David Bowie stuff was done in the 70s.
Nice.
The sound quality of that stuff is just amazing.
That's awesome.
Um, yeah, even the non-remastered versions. So,
Still sound good.
there's yeah, there's a lot of weird stuff like that. I like a
Yeah.
lot of just kind of off, off the beaten path kind of music. And of
Right.
course, the Beatles, big, huge. I've been a huge fan of the Beatles since I was about 12 years old. And yeah, I have my friend Nick Baker to thank for that if he ever watches my channel.
Yeah.
Nick Baker, he introduced me to the Beatles when I was like 12. And then
Yeah.
after he got me listening to the Beatles, then he introduced me to Led Zeppelin.
Oh, that's great.
Yeah. Friends, that's how I found out about music all in my younger years. It was like, your cool friends would, kinda
Yeah.
turn you on to different things.
You can't really
Uh,
go wrong channeling your inner Beatle. It's always a very
no,
inspiring thing.
it is, and that's always been one of my favorite bands, but that's not uncommon. I think the Beatles just has some kind of mass appeal, and it's really hard.
Hmm.
Even people I know that are not big fans of the Beatles, they know the songs. They don't know that it's the Beatles. And this is
Mm.
mostly younger people I'm talking about that I know. They don't even know. I know that song. I didn't know it's the Beatles.
Oh wow.
Like, well, to me, that's crazy. It's like, my generation, everybody knows the Beatles were everything. It's where, three
Yeah.
quarters of modern music comes from the Beatles. They
Right.
started all of this.
Yeah.
But now it's starting to change, people know the songs more, and that's unusual too. Because 'cause I'm going, "You don't know the history of the Beatles?" I was the guy who rented the complete Beatles VHS tape when I was in the '80s. I watched everything I could find about the Beatles. I knew all their stories, the whole story of the Beatles,
Yeah.
and then Led Zeppelin later too, so
Right. And I don't know if there's that many bands right now that people have that kind of depth of interest in to know every little thing about them as people. Like who are the people behind this music the way they did the Beatles and those early bands. But I
yeah,
find
it's
like
just classic
a lot of
band.
today's music, like I don't always like the sound of the records, you know? If it's not real musicians playing real instruments, and it's just too much low end or hyped high end or things that are hurting my ears, it's very hard for me to get in and spend some time listening to it. I like things that sound balanced and I like things that sound like really intricate arrangements and not just slamming and blowing things up and turning things inside out for the sake of like some kind of an effect. Like all those different channels that teach you how to be a better engineer. I was a member of all of them. I had subscriptions to all of them. Mix it with the masters, Pure Mix, Produce Like a Pro, all these different things. And I still love them and get tips from them and stuff, but it was project after project of hit song after hit song by producer that I just didn't even like the tunes or I didn't like the instrumentation. I was like, I'm not going to watch this tutorial for 7 hours because I don't even like the sound. I don't like the vocalist or I don't like the song doesn't go anywhere. Like I like a good composition and some intelligence and it's like, okay, you're starting to sound really old. you know but I
You have to
still
get back in
appreciate
history.
it was the same
Just
as when
go
I was
back.
10. I still didn't like that sound of that kind of a bass drum when I was 10. So it's not really that I'm falling out of sync with what's happening. It's just that now that I've used that technique, it doesn't even fit my music. Good thing I learned that technique.
It seems like people now, if you wanna find the people that, they really get involved in learning the history of the bands, people now they're doing that with more of the older bands, classic rock. They may know the entire history of, say,
Mm,
Metallica or The Police, but these modern bands, I mean, Matchbox 20. Does it I don't think I know anyone that knows the history of Matchbox 20 or Third Eye Blind or any of those bands, late '90s, early 2000s. They're just,
right.
I know of them and I've heard their songs, but I don't know anything about it. I couldn't tell you any of the members' names.
Exactly.
you know?
That's the thing in films lately. They say name one other band where you can name all the members. For a while there, it was always just people could name all the members of the Beatles, and that was it.
Right. I can name a lot of bands. My wife gets frustrated with me because I know so much about rock history, and she'll be playing, "Oh, that's such and such was the guitar player on that." I
Yep.
know my head is full of what some people would might consider useless knowledge, but I think the history of rock and the history of music and how it's recorded, to me, is really, really important. I think that music, it means more than people really understand anymore. We
Yeah.
used to. Seems like, even when I was growing up, which was 70s and 80s, we understood that back then we all knew that if you wrote the right song, you could change the world. And I
Mm,
think maybe we've lost some of that. Now, I think there's, no, it's harder to have your music be heard. So
yeah.
it's less realistic for anyone to actually hear anything, so your music doesn't make as much of a difference. I mean, it
Mm,
does, but
I know
I've
what you
been a
mean.
musician and I started doing YouTube because, I wanted a reason to have my studio. And, I needed a reason for it. I make records and release records, and, my friends, few people like them. I even had a couple of websites review my first album over in Europe. I had album reviews. There's no sales. Nobody really cared.
I know.
And so it becomes at a certain point, it's like, well, I have really no reason to do this. And so I started doing YouTube instead because I thought, well, I have all this knowledge about production and especially analog gear because I had this college degree and I'm doing IT work all the time and I'm not using my college degree. I'm only using it in my spare time to work in
Mm,
my studio, and so I just kind of moved that over to, I just moved over to YouTube and started doing YouTube videos and thought, oh, I'll show other people. And then
right.
I also thought, well, the channel, some of the videos I do, they help promote some of the music that I've worked on. I've done a lot of mixes of homespun centaurs material, and
Right.
that promotes the Heat's music, the work that we've done together. And hopefully people see those videos and a few of them say, hey, maybe I want to hear that album, and they go and download it
That's
and
great. Yeah.
listen to what we did. So it's really just, I mean, I don't care about the money. Anybody doing this doesn't care about the money. I have 2,400 subscribers nearly, and my YouTube channel, I think I make like $24 a month. It's not anything to live on, but it's fun. I enjoy making the videos.
Mm-hmm.
It gives me a creative outlet, gives me a reason to record a little short song for a video, and actually, keeps me playing my instruments and doing something in my studio instead of just having my whole life given over to the day job thing. So,
I know it's an interesting experiment. If you ask yourself, if you won the lottery, what would you do differently? And okay, maybe you'd travel more, or you'd buy better gear, or after a while you'd have a bigger house, or whatever the thing was. But for the most part, I'd be doing all the same things. I
right.
just, it's like, so that means you've already won, like you're
Yeah.
already living the life you want to lead. It's not hindering you in any way. And I love that you want to share what you know with people. I mean, that's why I wanted to talk to you and meet you, because your YouTube channel is really fun and you are very knowledgeable with all kinds of things. And, I just wanted to publicly thank you for your YouTube channel and sharing your knowledge because you don't have to. Most people can be snooty and hold on to everything themselves, but I love that saying, find what you love and share it. And
Mhm.
it's a beautiful thing that so many people share their things on YouTube. I mean, look how much we all have access to and can learn. Every time something goes wrong with the house or whatever, I can call an expert or I can look on YouTube and figure out how to fix it myself. And it's just fascinating how much knowledge is out there and that's shared. So thank you, Grady.
Absolutely. Well, you're welcome, and thank you for saying so. I really appreciate that. I just like doing YouTube. I started making the videos, mainly to share knowledge, and I thought
Mm,
I thought there was not enough about analog gear. All the YouTube channels I started to watch were plugins and, how to
yeah,
align your drum tracks and, things like that. And
yeah.
so I saw that there was a need for that. And I thought, well, that would be a great thing to do. And that positioned my channel differently because, I don't, what's the point in starting another YouTube channel where I'm just doing a screen capture and a plug-in? There's no point. There's tons of people doing that. And so I saw an opening and I said, there's an opening.
Huh,
I didn't know whether I could do it or not. I
that's great.
figured that I would be decent at it, but it just kind of, I don't know. I just started doing it one day. I just decided, hey, I'm going to start making YouTube videos, and
Nice.
I got started on it. So
That's really cool. Yeah, I remember my computer giving me problems and thinking, why am I recording to a computer? Yeah, I could just go back to a tape deck or a hard disk machine or a, and then of course you want all the editing aspects of the computer. The cut and paste is like gold. So yeah, it's
they're
kind of
very
fun.
frustrating, but that's why I leave mine alone. It doesn't do updates. It's just
Yep.
kind of once the computer is stable, I leave it alone because I need it to work.
Don't change. Yeah.
So yeah,
Yeah.
so that's been good.
Well, it's
But the
cool
rest
hearing
of
it
it,
from an IT expert. It's like,
yeah,
don't mess
I'm a
with it if it isn't
network
broken.
engineer, systems engineer. I mean, most of my life is dealing with computer issues.
Mm,
And so I love coming in the studio and making music. I'm actually going to be incorporating a little of that in my current job since I'm teaching now. We're actually going to do
sure.
some experiments. I'm going to do some cross class things with our music class and actually show the kids what different instruments look like on the screen when they're recorded so they can see the waveforms of the different instruments that they have.
Oh, that's smart. That's fun.
So that's going to be fun. So I kind of have shifted over and but I'm still here in the studio. Gonna keep doing the YouTube channel. I can't do as many videos as I used to. It's just gotten impossible for me to make the quality of content that I used to and to make as many videos. So I took a break, then I came back in June, and I've been once a week, sometimes every 2 weeks. So I'm kind of going to every 2 weeks or maybe once a month format because that's just all I can handle right now. I,
Yeah.
I really would love to make more of them. I used to make 3 videos a week, but it
Wow.
just is impossible to do that. I can't do it and keep the quality of the videos high enough. And, I'd have to revert to doing screen capture stuff and find something that's easier and less time consuming.
Hmm.
And I'm not willing to change the channel that much just to be able to
Right.
put out content.
Well, I
So
don't think the volume of how often you're doing it is upsetting anybody. I think they just like what you do when you do it.
so I really do enjoy it. That's what I tell everyone when they comment and they say, "Hey, we like your videos." The first thing I say is, "I really enjoy making the videos because I do. I wouldn't do it if I didn't enjoy it."
That's
I
cool.
like the conversations that I have with people. I like helping people and answering questions.
Right.
That's the other thing people need to know about me is I answer every single comment if I can and when I have time. I answer every question. If I don't know the answer, I try to point them in the right direction. At least give them a little help because
That's
analog
awesome.
gear is confusing and yeah,
That's
I
really nice
want
of
more
you.
people to be into it. So
Yeah. I don't always get notified when there's a comment. I sometimes go through and find a page where I can see all the comments and I see things that are wonderful that I wished I had responded to. And then someone laughs at me and goes, thanks, but I said that 2 years ago. And it's like, well, I just found out about it today. I didn't get any notification on it.
I've had that problem too, and that's just the YouTube thing, the way that it works. And it's also you have to have time to actually go back through all those comments. And
Yeah,
I don't know that I always have as much time as I'd like to have to be able to keep up with things like that. So
sure.
I do try though. I really try. If I've not answered anybody's comment, it's not because I didn't want to.
To mention two books that you might like since you like analog gear and such.
Yeah.
One is the Met Alliance recording drums with Elliot Shiner and Frank Filippetti and uh, all those folks. They just like they all got together and put together this big book called Recording Drums. You can only get it from Sweetwater, but it's like all the
Okay.
best drum miking techniques from the greats. And then the other one was written by Glenn Berger, and that's called Never Say No to a Rock Star. And there was a lot of
Okay.
fun things in there about studying with and working in studios with analog gear. So you might get a kick out of that.
Excellent. I will definitely look at those. And then I have a recommendation for you as well.
Thank you. I could use some.
Go listen to some Gentle Giant
I was
albums.
gonna. I have it written down here. Yeah.
Start with, I think my favorite album overall is The Power and the Glory.
Okay.
A different view of the studio. You can actually see the NS10, one of the NS10s back there now. I have NS10s and then the Tannoy Golds. I used
Nice.
to use KRKs, but I took those to my classroom so that I have decent
Ah,
audio for the classroom.
good.
So that's where the KRKs went.
Nice. I've got some NF10s up there too. Cool.
Actually, they sound terrible, but I actually love them because they will let you know if something's wrong in the mid range, you can hear it really obviously with NS10. So
Right. That's so great.
that's, yeah, that's what I used back in the day when I worked in commercial studios. Nearly every studio I worked at had a pair of NS10s, and
Right.
I'm lucky to have the pair that I have because they are not cheap these days to get real. Like mine are NS10M Studio,
Mm-hmm.
and I bought them from the same person I got the Soundcraft from, and I think they were $450. Good luck
Wow.
finding them for that now. They're way more than that.
I have the ones that were before that. Oh no, mine say NS10Ms. I
Yeah,
thought
they're
I saw a pair recently. They were like really cheap, like 250 bucks.
somebody, is it Aventone? They're making the CLA monitors, the
Yeah.
CLA 10 or something.
Oh, that's
Because
funny.
I know, yeah, Chris Lord-Alge, he loves the NS10s, and
Yeah.
he's a pretty good mixing engineer. But listen to some of the Gentle Giant stuff. That's what I was getting back to. I don't know if you'll like The Power and the Glory. That's my favorite record.
Okay.
If you get towards the later stuff, the album Giant for a Day, a lot of the diehard Gentle Giant fans don't like that record.
Okay.
It's much more like yacht rock. If like Steely Dan, that kind of 70s soft rock sound, but the songs are great. The earlier stuff is much more experimental,
Huh.
and not experimental like with sound effects and things. It's more just musically experimental. That's why I like it, because they're not using a lot of, there's some studio tricks. There's some things in their recordings I can't figure out how they would have done it with the technology at the time.
Mm.
But it's things, a lot of organic instruments. So
Nice.
I
Who
really,
engineered and produced it? The early stuff that the.
the early stuff, Tony Visconti, I think, and
Oh
the
wow.
later stuff, I'd have to look. Yeah, he did the first few albums, and then I
Pete
don't
Tang's
know
husband.
who. Yeah,
Used to be.
I don't know who did the later stuff. I know that was all done at Advision Studios.
Yeah.
So
And how
I'd
does
have to.
this? Oh, go ahead.
Oh, I don't. I know David Bowie recorded a lot there, but I
Cool.
don't know anything else. I haven't. I went down the rabbit hole about it, but I haven't looked into too much of the other stuff that was done there. Only I know that David Bowie and a lot of stuff
Yeah.
other people were done there. And then
How does
another.
this? Oh, go
Go
ahead.
ahead.
I was
Oh,
gonna go on another question for you.
go ahead.
Well, I might be changing the subject, so you should go back to your.
Oh, that's okay.
You were saying, and another. Here.
Oh, the others. There's another studio that was pretty famous. I'm trying to remember the name of it, but it was the one where 10cc recorded, also in England. It was
Ooh.
another famous studio.
Yeah. Have
And
you
to
watched
me,
that
that
video of the
which
10cc of the making of "I'm Not in Love"?
no, I haven't. I
Oh,
should
you
watch
gotta watch
that
that.
though. Yeah, I'm
That
a
is the
pretty big
coolest.
fan of 10cc. I'm not in love is a good song, but I'm more a fan of. Have you heard the song Hotel?
I'll
10cc
check it out.
Hotel.
I don't know
That's
if I
a
have or not. I'll go listen
It's
to
a
it.
strange one, but it's cool. It's a really unusual song.
Well, this one gets into the multi-tracking of how they did all the voices. Ah, 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 ah,
Oh,
ah, ah, all those kinds of things.
that's really
How they
interesting.
played the console as an instrument. So yeah.
That's what I do. Most of my mixes in here on this console, I'm not using automation. I'm
Yeah,
using
it's a
hands.
performance.
Yeah,
Yeah, that's
and a
cool.
lot of times using hands on the console. Sometimes more than one set of hands if it's a complicated mix.
Sure, I remember those days.
Yeah, I just like working that way. I don't know why. I could use automation. I have it in Reaper, and I've probably done a little bit of that with things that I really needed to and just automated in the box. But
Hmm,
in general, it's hands-on. We're mixing on the console here. So,
nice. So tell me about this Google Pixel 5.
that's just a phone. I've had this phone for about 3 years, and I bought it because at the time I was using Windows to edit my videos, and pulling videos off of an iPhone onto Windows is a little bit more complicated. It's
Oh,
possible, but it's more time consuming. You have to use iTunes, and it was all these different steps.
right.
And the amount of time it takes to make my videos, I've had to find ways and techniques to use when I'm making videos that make it easier and quicker to make the videos.
Of course.
That's one of them. I was using Windows back then, and so I got the Google phone because it's easier to pull the videos off of the phone than it was the iPhones, which I had
Oh.
all iPhones previously.
I thought it was a thing. I downloaded an app for my phone and then an app for the Mac, and it lets you use the iPhone as a camera. And I recorded one of these chats this way, but then my voice was out of sync with my own picture. Even though I
I've
could
had trouble
choose it,
with that too.
I've had I'm able to choose it in Zoom, but it didn't record me well when it bounced out. So I don't know what happened.
It's strange. Some of the video chat apps and things are they confuse me. I mean, I
Yeah,
do this
they're at
stuff
the
for a
very beginning.
living. Yeah,
I think
so
they're too young yet. You know, they don't know what to tell us how to work it yet. They'll come up with
but
something better.
the Pixel 5 is just a good camera. That's really why I bought it. I bought it because at the time it was easier to integrate it with Windows and it would speed up the production of the YouTube
Looks
videos.
great. That's why I was asking. Looks great.
Yeah, it has a good, and this is the selfie camera that we're using. When I
Wow.
in my normal videos, when I'm using the phone, I'm using the main camera.
The back
Yeah, it has
camera.
two. It has the wide angle and then the regular lens on this
Wow.
phone. And so most of my videos are shot with one of the two other lenses, and I just really like the phone. The quality of the camera is really good, and that's why I bought it. And also,
Yeah.
if I was going to go to something besides an iPhone, I didn't want to go to a Samsung, something with a modified version of Android on it. I wanted pure Android, and
Hmm.
so I got a Google phone, so I don't have all the bloatware. It's just the Android operating system on the Google phone.
Oh, and can you use it with the Mac too?
Yeah, actually, I did have to load an app on the Mac now to pull the videos off of the Android phone onto the Mac. I have to have an Android app. So now my next phone, I'm going to go back to an iPhone since I've gone to editing my videos on a Mac now. So now I can go back to an iPhone. So yeah, it's but the Pixel's been great. It's been
Yeah.
a great phone. So
Yeah.
I've been pleased with it.
That's cool. I
Yeah.
was using an Android phone to just use the TuneLab app to tune my piano because when I got in touch with the company, they wouldn't give me a discount because I wasn't a professional piano tuner.
Ah,
Here I'm offering to pay them. It's a $300 app. I'm offering to pay them something, but just give me a discount because I'm a professor and I'm an artist and a studio owner with a piano and I want to tune it myself. They're like, no, sorry, you're not a piano tuner, so we're not going to give you a discount. So you know what they told me to do? Buy a $40 or $60 Android phone. I don't remember how much it cost. It was pretty cheap. And download the app for free.
and that
So that's
worked,
what I
huh?
did, and it
Yeah.
works. And sometimes I have to take a little 15-minute break because it's on demo mode. But it's like, but I can play piano then and practice and wait for it and then go back and tune it again. And it's just so funny to me that they wouldn't take some money from me, but they told me to download the free thing. I was like, what? That's amazing. Okay, thanks for the tip. So
Sometimes, sometimes these companies don't make a lot of sense. The
I
software
know.
companies don't.
That's what I'm saying.
It's really kind of odd the way they do things. I use the Peterson strobe tuner app,
Yep.
and that works on iPhone and Android.
For
But I don't
piano?
have a no, I don't have a piano to tune. It's
Yeah.
guitars, basses, and things. The only piano-like instrument I have around here is a Casio keyboard. I don't have
Yeah.
any. I used to have a Kawai Baby Grand electric piano.
This is a Peterson
Oh,
strobe for guitar and bass.
yeah,
And that's nice.
yeah,
That works really well.
yeah. I just have the app version of that, but
Cool.
it does work really, really well.
That's
I wish I
awesome.
had some guitars to show you, but actually all the guitars are not in the studio because of the excessive heat. And so
Absolutely.
instruments are in the house right now, and I don't have anything. Otherwise, I'd bring out a guitar. I have a really cool Maton MS 2000 Deluxe, which is an Australian made guitar.
Wow.
That's the only exotic guitar I still own. I've sold a lot of my other instruments have kind of come and gone. And I just have a small arsenal of the things that I tend to use the most. And
Yeah,
I'm the guy that used to have a collection of I think at the peak I had maybe 23 or 24 guitars,
I get it.
and now I think it's three or four and a bass is really
Yeah,
all
it's
I've
like
got.
keep the workhorses, right?
Absolutely, that's
I
what I
know.
do. Keep the workhorses
I had a whole
and
bunch too, and I thought I want more recording gear instead, so I sold a bunch too.
that's what I've done. Is I used to have more guitars, and now it's more preamps and more outboard gear.
Yeah.
But I have stopped doing as much of my own music anymore. I generally am more producing other people,
Hmm.
and that's not my day job. But I do still record demos, and I haven't done an album. The last album that I actually worked on came out in 2021, and I haven't done anything since then, which is really weird because for years it was like I had a day job, then I'd have sessions on evenings, weekends, YouTube videos, and just kind of all of that.
Hmm.
But after the pandemic, we just finished the last Homespun Centaurs album, the and that's the last one that I've done. I did master the remix album, which was I think the next year they did a
Oh,
remix
cool.
album. I just did the mastering on that, but I haven't done anything. It's kind of it's the last couple of years has been as far as anything I've actually done here in the studio that's been released. There really hasn't been much of it.
Hmm.
Yeah, that's different for me because I've spent the last, 20 years, even when I was working, I'd have some kind of recording project going on at all times. And all of a sudden, here the last few years, I haven't had that going on.
I know
So
change even takes us by surprise within ourselves. It's like, what? I'm not doing what? I don't want to do what? I'm not interested in what? Like, it's like, that's different.
it's
Who are
just
you?
very, yeah, it's very interesting. I love to do it. I just haven't had the same kind of time that I did. And what time
Okay,
I
yeah.
did have, I've tried to do YouTube videos because that's, where people are actually watching what I do. People are paying attention to what I do on YouTube.
Hmm.
So I think I'm more important now as more of an educator on my YouTube channel and in my day job since I became a teacher recently. I see myself more as that. And even when I was a musician, I'm more of an artist instead of a musician. As I've said, I'm not the best musician in the world. Um, I mean, I may be better than I think I am, but that's not. I know a bunch of people that can play the instruments better than I can, but I understand how things sound, and
Yeah. And how they
I
translate.
crave, yeah, how to
How
make
to
it
how to
translate.
get that sound from that player to translate to actually be a record.
Right, and you want it to be larger than life. That's a big reason why using the analog gear. It adds that saturation and that largeness to the sound that actually takes something that sounds like somebody recorded it in a little room. And all of a
Hmm.
sudden now it's like, something big. It's larger than life. And
That's
that's what I
cool.
look for in records. And when I try to make things, I want them to have a really big sound. I want it to make an impression and to immerse you in the sound field when you hear
And
the mix.
what are some of your recording or mixing techniques to do that?
Just mainly using the console and then a lot of panning, getting the panning right
Okay.
and I'll typically pan certain things, I'll pan them a lot wider than you might think I would, or that you might normally do that just because I want that width and that, but not everything. That's the problem. If you pan everything really wide, then you lose the width because you've got everything panned. So you have
Right.
to choose specific things. So it's all panning. Sometimes it's EQ. It can be delay and reverb. It just kind of depends. The way I
Contrast.
work is I'm just intuitively listening to what I hear, and then okay, well maybe a little bit of reverb, and I can push that a little further back that way, and try that. Okay, that didn't really work. Maybe I need to do that a different way. And it's
Mm-hmm.
just a lot of experimentation. It's really how I work, just using my ears, experimenting. I do have a lot of tips and tricks. Some of them I've used in videos, but I also don't think that those are necessary all the time.
Mm-hmm.
The real trick is these days is not going on YouTube and using every trick you see on YouTube in the book on your mix, because just because you saw that trick on YouTube, like, do you actually need to use that trick on this track? It's kind
Yeah.
of making the decision on that. That's where a lot of my thought processes comes, is like, I'm thinking I know of a way to kind of improve what I'm hearing, but do I
Right.
really want to do it that way? And
Yeah.
you have to balance those things and those tips and tricks out.
You need the
My
wisdom to know when.
Right, and my favorite
Yeah.
way to deal with drums, instead of sample replacement, which a lot of people do, I like the old Mutt Lang trick, taking like a snare track, duplicate it, pitch the one of the two snare tracks down, and then
Mm.
blend it with the other one to give it more weight. The trick to that is you need to gate it, because if you pitch down the snare track and you've got any hi-hat bleeding and you don't have it gated, so I'll gate that duplicated snare so that I cut all the hi-hat and bleed out of it, just have that fundamental snare drum tone, and then I'll use a pitch shifter and pitch shift it down just enough and just use my ear. Where is that pitch shifted snare going to mesh with the original snare track to give it more weight in the mix? That's just one tip. There's a lot of stuff like that, and a lot of it is recording how you record something.
Cool. Super cool.
And the
Yeah.
instruments, drum sounds, it's all about the drum kit. I have a 67 Ludwig kit. I get good drum sounds. Why do I get good drum sounds? It's because the drums sound good. They're just good sounding
Absolutely.
drums. So
Yeah.
it makes it easier. The sound starts at the source, and you
Definitely.
can't put a band-aid on everything.
No. And I want to experiment. I haven't ever recorded my drums without the bottom heads. I want to do some of that, like on Revolver. And then I want to get some calf heads for the
Oh
tops of
yeah.
some of them and try some of that because I haven't done that. I usually do the tea towels, like some bandanas and things like that, but I want to
You
experiment with
try
some
that.
different
Try
sounds.
that with a vintage Tascam preamp. I did that with the M35. I put some towels on the drums and then recorded them with the old Tascam preamps.
Yeah,
Awesome. Those
yeah,
Tascam preamps have this kind of dryness to the sound.
yeah,
You
they
can
do.
actually take a non-dampened drum and put it through those preamps, and it has more of that sound. I don't know
That's
what those
amazing.
things do. They're
I
Yeah,
don't
they're
have it
actually really
anymore.
impressive. I
I
was
don't,
really
I don't,
impressed with that.
that's cool. I don't have that mixer anymore, but I remember them sounding pretty darn good. Yeah.
I've still got one sitting over here, sitting leaning against the couch over across the room from me right now. It's still here.
I
I
like the
haven't.
colors on it. Some nice colors.
Yeah, it's like orange and green and blue knobs and stuff. It's very 70s looking,
The,
but
the
I like
Studimaster
it.
track mix had the best colors. I missed that a lot. That one just really looked good.
I like those. The Studio Masters were great consoles. We
Really
had
were.
those in our lab in college. We had the Mixdown Classics, the Studio Master Mixdown Classics, and we had,
Wow.
like, I think some ADATs and some Behringer compressors. And that was interesting. I had an ADAT master tape of a band I recorded here in East Texas before I moved to Arizona to college. And we went to mix it in college. I took the master with me, and one of
Nice.
my friends flew out to Arizona. We went in the school lab and we mixed it on the studio master in the school lab. And then we got into one of the bigger studios. We actually mixed it on an AMEC console in Studio B at the
Wow.
school. And when I got back to East Texas, guess which mix we actually used? It was the Studio Master mix from the lab that actually
Wow.
sounded better
That
than the
sounded the
AMEC.
best.
Yeah,
That's
it
so
did. I don't
great.
know. I don't know why. Maybe just my ears weren't in tune, but the mixes from the lab with the Studio Masters won over the AMEC mixes from the I mean, that's just kind of how it is. It doesn't matter what you use because it may
Yeah.
still
You
sound
just
really
gotta
good.
like it. Yeah. Well, this has been so awesome. Grady, I can't thank you enough. This was cool.
Absolutely. I think so too. I really appreciate you inviting me to do this. This is really only the second time I've done any kind of a collaboration video. And it was just great. I really appreciate it. And of course, if you ever want to do it again, let me know. We'll jump on the chat and talk about, maybe we pick a different topic ahead of time the next time, and I have some
Sure.
note, have a more in-depth discussion.
Specific thing. Yeah. That
Yeah.
sounds great. Well,
All
thank you
right.
so much. And
Absolutely. Thank
take
you.
good care and enjoy teaching. And I'm going to look up some of these things and go have some fun listening.
Yeah, go listen to Gentle Giant. Listen to The
Yeah.
Power and the Glory.
Hmm.
What's the other one? Freehand. Those are probably their two most well known. Those are very
Okay.
good, very
Well,
interesting records.
and check out the drum book from Met Alliance and Glenn Berger's "You Never Say No to a Rock Star" and the 10cc video on how they did the vocals for "I'm Not in Love." That was pretty awesome.
I'm gonna watch that today.
Yeah, you'll
Yeah,
flip. Every time I watch it, I go, that's so cool. And
I
it's
can't
used
wait.
very effectively in a film. There's a film called 52577 that I just watched. It's one of my favorite films now. And that's by Patrick Reed Johnson. And it was about the day that Star Wars was released. So if you watch that
Oh,
on Apple TV, 52577, that is a really fun story about an artistic person wanting to make films.
that sounds like some great suggestions. Those are great suggestions.
I love all those kinds of films of people who are different, don't fit in anywhere, nobody understands them, and they triumph because they stick to what they love. So that's
Yeah,
the whole thing.
that's me. That's me. And I'm glad to have finally found a
Me
place
too.
on YouTube where people actually, they kind of listen to what I'm saying and people actually enjoy the videos. I never
Yeah,
thought in a million years I would get any subscribers on YouTube. I just said, I'm going to try it, see what happens. And it's actually, it's been phenomenal. I've enjoyed meeting the people. It's one of the most fun things that it's one of the most enjoyable things I've ever done in my life at this point. So
it's a cool interactive thing, definitely.
it really is. It really
Yeah,
is. It's absolutely wonderful. I'm
I've
so
met some
glad
great
that
people.
YouTube is great and that we got to meet each other because of YouTube. It's
There
a
you
great
go,
thing.
because of YouTube. So take good care, and thanks
You
so much.
too. Thank you.
See you soon, Grady.
All right. Have a great day.
You
Thank
too.
you.
Ciao.
Bye
Bye-bye.
bye.